Ho, 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 it is time to sew some stuff for stocking stuffers. In this video, you're going to find 8 full tutorials. These are brand new since the last time I did a 12 things to sew for stocking stuffers back in December of 2025. If you're curious what those things were, you're going to find a link to that video as well as timestamps and a list of each of these 8 videos in the video description. I know this is a long one, but the goal is to have everything in one place so it's super easy for you to get started sewing for Christmas. So whether you're working on this for Christmas in July, getting a jump start, or it is December 20th and you just need some quick things to sew up, I have got your back. These are all small. You can make them from fabric scraps, and as the title would suggest, they should fit into an average size Christmas stocking. So let's get into it. There's a new lip balm holder in town. Well, in this video and in my Etsy shop. So this one has been one of my most popular videos and most popular patterns on Etsy, but I've had a few people question whether the lipstick or lip balm is going to fall out. I've never had it fall out, but I thought, well, if people are concerned, let's make a different version. So I came up with this design to make it with a flap. So it uses hook and loop tape, Velcro being the most commonly known brand, and it fits both lip balm or lipstick. Now, the way it goes together with this flap, you have to use a different piece of fabric for the front of the flap and for the back so that we can get this little tab in here for the lobster clasp. And is this not the cutest lobster clasp you have ever seen? Super excited. Keep watching in the video. I'll show you all the different colors it comes in. And if you look at the video description, it will show you where you can find these on Amazon. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this lipstick or lip balm holder out of non-directional fabric. You can use the same technique for solids. This is non-directional because there are lobsters that face every direction. So no matter which way you turn this fabric, it looks cute and it looks correct. It doesn't look upside down one way or the other. In my Etsy shop, I have the written pattern with all of the templates. And it also includes how to make one with directional fabric so that the back has the direction going correct, the flap is correct, and this pocket and everything is correct. But today we're going to do the simpler version. To make a flap, you do have to use 2 pieces of fabric for the outside so that you can get this tab in there, no matter what kind of fabric. So it's a little more complicated than the basic lip balm tutorial that uses a Key Fob Hardware, but you also don't need the Key Fob Hardware and you can go right to the lobster clasp instead of a keyring. So let's talk about what you need. First, this is going to be the inside fabric, and this needs to be 2 3/4 inches wide by 9.5 inches tall. And you're going to use a fusible interfacing that is the same size. This is a thermoweb interfacing. It's a lightweight, but it's kind of fabricy looking. I just really like the look and feel of this. And on this bumpy side is the fusible. We're going to do that in a minute. Then for the flap, so basically the outside and the front of the pocket, you need the flap piece, which is 2 3/4 by 2 1/4. This bottom piece is 2 3/4 by 7 3/4. And then because I like using these cute little 1/2 inch lobster clasps, your tab is going to be made out of a piece of fabric 1.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And aren't these cute? I just discovered these. I bought like 80 of them for under $10, all different colors. I'll put a link to my Amazon storefront that'll show you where you can get this variety of colors. And then if you were sewing and selling or knew you just wanted a lot of one color, there are places that sell these just one color at a time. Or you can use the more traditional silver. We're going to go with the red. And then this one is going to be all lobsters. So even the flap is going to be lobsters. Just the tab will be red. And we're going to be using hook and loop tape. The commonly known brand is Velcro, but the product is actually called hook and loop tape. I originally intended to use snaps because I thought that would be really cute, these little plastic cam snaps, but I quickly discovered that it is very hard to push it closed when it is on something that is curved. It kind of wiggles around. So it was really frustrating me. I don't want to frustrate you, so we're going with hook and loop. Then we need a thread. I'm going to use pinking shears to clip the curves. I'll show you how and why. Small scissors to cut that curve, turning tool for when we're turning it right side out, and I used a rotary cutter when I cut the pieces of fabric and the interfacing. That is about all you're going to need, in addition to your sewing machine, threads, iron, and ironing board. First, we are going to cut the flap. Now, if you get the pattern, it's going to have a template, but if you don't want to get the pattern, this is really easy. All you're going to do is you're going to fold this in half, the 2 3/4 inch way. So you're matching this 2 1/4 inch side. And then you're just going to cut a small curve off of the corner, the open corner, not the fold. See, it's just barely anything. So you can just wing that if you want to, which is basically how I created the template. So you're just going to cut a curve from one side to the other, and there is your tab. That is how you're going to do it if you don't want to buy the pattern. We're going to start with the iron. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to put the fusible interfacing onto the wrong side of our inside fabric. So the one that is 2 3/4 by 9 1/2. So you're going to put the scratchy fusible side up, the wrong side of the fabric down, and then my pressing cloth is still AWOL. I don't know what happened to it. So I'm just going to use a piece of cotton and put that over top of it. Now the reason I'm doing that is just to protect my iron. If this were to shift or if the interfacing was a little bit too big, you don't want that sticking to the bottom of your iron, but it can stick to another piece of fabric and it'll be really easy to pull off. So I'm just going to heat this according to the manufacturer's instructions, which is dry iron, hold down for about 8 to 10 seconds, but just check the instructions for whatever kind of interfacing you use. And then I'm just going to double check and make sure it looks nice and adhered. If you go like this, sometimes you'll see a little air bubble pop up and you'll know that the fusible material didn't really fuse all the way, and then you'll just heat that again. So that looks good. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press one short end 1/4 inch to the back. And because this is non-directional, it doesn't matter which end I use. And I'm going to use my hot ruler because it just makes it so quick and easy. I just folded that over so it was at that 1/4 inch mark. And I'm just going to press that one more time because it does have a little bit of a thickness. You don't really need it for this size fabric. You can pretty much eyeball and do it, but I do like to use it and I like to show you how it works because it's especially handy when you're doing longer projects and you just need something folded over in a consistent manner. I'm going to take this small piece, I'm going to do the same thing, and this time I'll just do it without the ruler just to show you it's quite easy to do that small of a section with your fingers. And the reason I do this is because I find it to be easier to press this ahead of time instead of having the raw edges up and then when we sew it all together, having to fold them under. This just makes it faster. The next thing we need to do is create our tab. So you're going to fold this in half, matching the long edges, the 2 1/2 inch edges, and give that a quick press. Now I'm using my clapper because not only does it give you a good crease, but it also cools the fabric off and kind of sets those fibers. Then we're going to open it up with it like a book, not like a tent. And we're going to fold each of these raw edges into that center fold. Now this time I'm just going to finger press because it is so short. It's pretty easy to do with your fingers. And then I'm going to fold it one more time. Therefore, we're encasing these raw edges on the inside, never to be seen again. And then hit that with the iron. So this is going to be the tab that we put our little lobster clasp on. But first, I'm going to sew just down this one side because it's so skinny. Sometimes when it's wider, I will sew on both sides, but this is so skinny. I'm just going to sew the one side so that this stays closed. So here are our pieces. Now we're going to head to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew that tab, and because I'm sewing that and it's quite short and I'm starting off the edge, I'm going to start with a leader fabric. That is just a scrap piece of fabric that I start sewing on. So if you end up with any of these little bird's nest knots from not pulling up your bobbin thread, they're going to be on the scrap fabric and not on your project. So I usually sew like 1/2 inch to 1 inch and then onto our project. And because both edges are going to be inside the project, I don't even worry about knotting at the beginning or end. You can if you want to, but I haven't had any problems doing it like that. Now we're going to start working on this back section. We're going to put our tab through the lobster clasp hole, and we're going to fold it in half, matching these raw edges. Then, not on the edge that we folded, but the other top end, we're just going to fold that in half to find the center. And we're going to place the tab right there. I'm going to put a little clip, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and just baste that in place so that it stays straight. If you don't baste it and then you just add this, sometimes it ends up crooked. Ask me how I know. Now that that is basted on, we are going to put the straight edge of the flap lined up with that edge. We're going to clip, and then we are going to sew that on with a 1/4 inch seam. This time you definitely want to make sure you backstitch to secure those stitches. I'm going to go backwards over that tab. Now I'm just going to push the flap forward. So all of the both seams are going to go towards the flap. We don't want to have to try and fold this tab. So the tab stays facing the long fabric. The seams go up that way. And now we have a piece of fabric the same size as our inside. Next, we are going to put these right sides together, and we are going to start by lining up these folded edges to make sure that when we turn it right side out, they're going to be lined up nicely. Because this part will be seen, that will be the top edge of your pocket. Then we're going to place it down, right sides together. Now, this sometimes likes to peek up that way. We want it down, so it keeps everything flat and it keeps it out of the way of sewing that curve. Actually, I'm going to do it from this side because we need to be able to see this curve as we are sewing. And I don't cut the curve on the inside piece because we're going to have to trim that curve with pinking shears or clip the curve so that it will turn correctly. So why bother cutting it twice? Now I'm going to start down here and I'm going to sew all the way up around the curve and down to the bottom. Because I don't want any threads sticking off the end of here, I'm not going to use the leader fabric, but this time I'm going to pull up the bobbin thread. I'm also going to use this little hump jumper, which is just a folded up piece of fabric. I'm going to put it under my foot just to even it out so that the back of the foot is going to be at the same angle as the front, since this front is 4 layers of fabric because we have the 2 layers and each of them are folded. So to pull up the bobbin thread, you hold your top thread, put your needle down, needle up, still holding, give a little pull. That grabs the bobbin. I use tweezers, I pull that, and then I use the tweezers to help get them both under the foot. Still holding, don't pull, but hold it nice and tight. You're going to take a few stitches forward and then a few stitches back. By holding both of these threads up top, that is what prevents that nonsense, and you certainly just don't want it. Now we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam, and right now I'm using a standard stitch length of 2.4. Now when I get close to the curve, I'm going to change my stitch length. I'm going to lower it to about 1.6 or 1.7. Using a smaller stitch length makes it easier to get a nice smooth curve, and the smoother the sewn curve, the better the curve is going to look when you turn it right side out and press. Just go really slowly and turn as best as you can. Once you end up like, oh, I'm not going to make that turn, then keep your needle down, lift your foot, and turn it a little bit and get back on track. I want to make sure that these seams stay this way and that the presser foot doesn't push them like that and have it twist. So I just use the side of my scissors because they're always here and handy. I could use my tweezers as well, just to make sure that that goes under the foot properly. And now that I'm back on a straightaway, I'm going to change my stitch length back to the 2.4. Now, when you have already pre-folded this, you also need to be careful when your fabric hits your needle plate, because sometimes mine has a little bit of a bump. Sometimes it will push this way. So you want to make sure it stays folded as it gets up there. And then I'm going to get ready to press that down to make sure that that goes under the presser foot correctly. Now that we have that sewn, it is time to clip this curve. You could just take scissors and you could trim this and then do snip, snip, snip. Basically, you need to cut in there to relieve some of the pressure so that when you turn this, you'll get a nice curve. I prefer to use pinking shears, and I especially love these pinking shears from Fiskars. I like the way you just squeeze them with your whole hand. It's not as hard on your thumb and the tendon. They call it their easy action. And I have every kind of scissor I can get that has this kind of a grip. So I'm just going to really quickly trim around that top edge, making sure I don't cut the stitching, of course. Look how fast that was. So that cut this side. This is the side that was just squared off, and this, so it is good to go. Next, we are just going to turn it right side out. I've tried it with tube turners, and because of the size, it's just really not worth it. And because there's that hook and tab at the other end, it's just as easy to just use your fingers and push and pull. Once you see that tab, you can use that to help kind of pull up, but remember that you still need to get that top section out. So now we need to get this straightened out better, which isn't working really well with me pulling like that. So I'm going to use my tube turner. A chopstick would probably be even better because it would be longer, but this works. And I'm just very gently rubbing along that stitch line to get that curve. And now see how easy this is? It is already folded under and lined up perfectly for us. Now we're just going to put this down and kind of press to make sure those seams are on the edges. We're just kind of roll with our fingers. We want to make sure that shape is correct before we hit it with the iron, and then we are going to iron that flat. And now I'm going to just sew straight across there. And that is going to become this, the top edge of the pocket. I'm going to pull the bobbin thread up again, and this time I'm going to use 2 of these because now we're a little bit thicker because we have the layers, and the seam. So 2 of these things are going to kind of balance it out. And you never sew on these, they just push off the back and you can use them over and over again. Now it is time to start adding our hook and loop tape. It's called that because one side is what I call scratchy, and that is the hooks. And then the other side is soft and fuzzy, and that is the loops. So these hooks jam in there and they stay together. I'm sure you know about this, but that's kind of why those pieces are called that. I always start with the loops, and I'm going to sew that centered about 1/2 inch down, so pretty close to that seam line. And the loop goes on the same side as the tab. So this looks like the outside, but when we fold it up, this is going to be the front of the pocket. So I'm just going to clip that really quickly. And then, just to save time, we're going to figure out where the hooks go as well. Now, with hook and loop tape, you always have it on the opposite side so that it folds over. So this is on this side, so the hooks are going to go on this side up on the flap. Okay, I'm going to pin this on here just so I can show you how I confirm where the hook goes. Okay, so 3 1/4 inches up. Then if this goes there and we fold it down so that it is 4 inches total, I always look at the top before actually sewing on the hook and loop or sewing around the edges to create that pocket. I am looking at where the edge of the flap is and this. We want to make sure it's not like down here or not too far over the front. But everything went together beautifully. So this is just going to go right here centered. Now for this one, I used white to match the hook and loop. And then I used red bobbin thread because I wanted it to blend with the flap. I didn't want an obvious rectangle sewn. It doesn't matter how well it blends because you're really not going to jam in there and take a look at that. So that was red. But for this one, I'm going to actually change my bobbin thread to a light blue because there's more light blue where this is going to be sewn than red. I'm going to change out my bobbin to this blue that's going to match nicely with the fabric. And I've already changed the top thread to white. I'm going to pull up the bobbin thread for both of these because I don't want a big knot on the back. Because this is so small and we're sewing it down, sometimes it likes to shift. So when I'm doing my first stitches, I'm often holding that as well with my scissors or the tip of my scissors. See how that really doesn't show because we used the blue that matches the base of the fabric. Now we're just going to do the same thing over here. Make sure your tab is going this way and that this isn't going to get in the way of your sewing. This is the one that was even more important because it's on the flap that will be closed and you'll see, and it looks fantastic. So for this one, just to show the difference, since I've used red on the other lobsters, I'm going to use this blue on the top and bottom. And then we can just see how changing the fabric changes the look of the finished product a little bit. These would be really cute to coordinate with a sunglass case, a wristlet holder, maybe a travel tissue cover, so many ways to go. So let me know in the comments if you're gonna make these, who you're gonna make them for, and what kind of fabric you might use. So our hook and loop is on. We're going to fold this back up, double check that that pocket is 3 1/4 inches. And then I'm going to clip each side. Now you don't sew across this fold or it takes away a lot of the space for your lipstick or your lip balm. Just like when we sewed it together, we're going to go up this side around the top, decreasing our stitch length as we go, and down here. Double back each time you are at the top of these pockets because that will just give you more stability and strength as you're putting things in and out. Now that is getting really thick, so you want to make sure you have a pretty sharp needle. If you didn't change it before the project, you might want to change it now, or it's going to clunk, 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 trying to get through all of that. And as you sew, you want to make sure this is back this way and not flipped up this way. All right, back to the machine. Definitely need our hump jumpers. And we're definitely going to pull up that bobbin thread. Now, as I mentioned a second ago, it's pretty thick everywhere. So I like to start not at the very end, but I don't know, maybe 1/8 inch up, because even with these hump jumpers, sometimes it'll get stuck and it'll just sew right here and then you have to rip it out. Ask me how I know. Happened to me last night. So if you start a little bit up, it gives your feed dogs a little bit more to work with. I'm also using a walking foot. Now I'm going to sew about 1/8 inch from the edge, just so I have lots of room for whatever I'm putting in here. You know, lipstick might cheat, the size might vary a little bit. You don't want it to be too tight. We don't have to make this a tight fit like that other style because it does have a flap that will stop anything from falling out. See how that moved really nicely. We didn't start on the very edge. I'm gonna make sure that gets back where it's supposed to be. You go back and forth, the edge of that pocket. And now I'm going to change my stitch length. And now that I'm around the curve, I'm going to put it back. That's it, it's done. Now it just Velcro's closed. Have that cute little hook. And all you need to do is decide what to put in it. Fits a fatter lipstick really nicely. Lip balm, you can just hook that onto the edge of a bag, onto your keychain, so that you will always have these at the ready. And one thing that's fun is it is really easy to do a variety of fabrics to give different looks, especially since this top flap has to be sewn from a different fabric than the back and the pocket. So I've done a few different varieties. Look how cute that is. Let me know in the comments which one you like the best. You can grab the pattern that has all of the printable templates for all the different pieces, including making it with directional fabric like I did with this one. So what do you think? Do you see these in your future? Are you going to give them as gifts? It would be great stocking stuffers, teacher appreciation, coworker gifts, just a little thank you for whoever, or a random act of kindness. These are also great to sew and sell. These would sew up really quickly if you wanted to batch create them. So make sure you have subscribed to my channel so you never miss a fun little tutorial, and happy sewing. You or someone you know loves lipstick or lip balm and needs to have it on the go, and they don't want to fumble in their purse anymore looking for it, then you are in luck, because in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to make this lip balm or lipstick holder that just sits in here. You can hook it onto your purse. This is going to help keep this at your fingertips. This is one of those cute little projects that have so many uses. This is a great stocking stuffer, coworker gift, things to sew and sell, things to donate. Adding the Key Fob Hardware, it comes with the keychain. You can also put a lobster clasp on there if you want to be able to clip it onto a bag so that it is always at your fingertips and you're not rummaging through looking for what you need. You need very few things to make these cute little lip balm holders with the Key Fob Keychain. First, you're going to need a piece of fabric. And if you're using directional fabric, the direction needs to be going this way and not side to side. Then you need a piece of lightweight interfacing that is fusible on one side. We're going to need a pressing cloth for pressing the interfacing onto the fabric. I'll show you why and how in a second. Then a 1-inch Key Fob Hardware, and I highly recommend the pliers that come with these silicone tips. This is the perfect size for squeezing this shut. You won't end up with any dents. Sometimes people try and use pliers just to save a few dollars. It often ruins a few Key Fob Hardware pieces. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is get this interfacing fused to the wrong side of the fabric. Now, with any kind of fusible material, which is one-sided, it's going to be scratchy on one side, and that's how you can tell that's where the fusible material is. The other side is going to be smoother. So you're going to put the scratchy side to the back of your fabric and center it. Make sure it's not hanging over, like you don't want it like this. And then we're going to flip that over. The reason that you're going to iron from the fabric side and not the fusible side is you want the heat as close to the fabric and the fusible material as possible. While this is pretty thin, I'm sure it would work if we fused from this other side. It's just a good habit to get into because some things are thicker and you really do need the heat coming straight down through the fabric to the fusible material. Now comes the pressing cloth. This is, you can buy them as pressing cloths. You can use an old piece of muslin, a piece of cotton. In a recent live video, somebody said their mom used to use a piece of an old pillowcase or sheets. So it's pretty much just a cloth to protect your iron. This is going to put a layer between your fabric and fusible material and your iron, partially in case this gets moved, right? So if it slides for some reason and the fusing part is sticking out, you want it to fuse by mistake onto pressing cloth and not onto your iron. Now, because we do worry about things shifting a little bit, we're going to be pressing and not ironing. And if you haven't heard this before, yes, there is a distinction. When you're ironing, it's like when you iron clothes. You keep the iron down and you move the iron around. Pressing is to lift it, push down, and press, and then lift it, move it, push down, and press. So there's no gliding of the iron. That is what can cause a shifting when you're doing this or pressing seams for quilt blocks or other things. For this and most fusible products, you're going to use no steam and often the wool or silk setting. Make sure you just check the directions on whichever product you're using. I like to start in the center. This says to use medium pressure, so I'm pressing down, but not like my life depends on it, and keep it pressed for about 10 seconds. Then I'm going to lift, and I'm going to move forward, and I'm just going to keep doing that until I have covered all of the fabric and have the entire length fused together. What this interfacing is doing is it adding a little bit of stiffness to the fabric so that it's going to hold the shape of the lipstick holder well. You always want to let that cool, and then I always just check the edges, because if I haven't fused well somewhere, it's going to be at these ends or the edges, especially since I always start in the middle. Well, there's an air bubble right there. I'm going to give it another shot right there. You want to make sure you take your time and get any fusible material pressed well so that the project will turn out well. It kind of is a cascading problem if you don't have it adhered on there well enough. Now that we have these fused together, we are going to fold this right sides together, matching these short ends, and just finger press that fold. This fold is going to be up here where the Key Fob Hardware is, so now we need to create these angles so that it gives it a nice shape. There are two ways to do that. If you get the pattern, this is available in the Etsy shop, and it gives you all the details and lots of pictures of what to do. It includes a template. So to use the template, you're just going to cut this out of the paper. The first time I use it, I'm obviously not precise about how I cut it because that will happen when we're using the rotary cutter. I do cut this top edge well because we need to put that right on that fold. So I'm going to show you using this on the one side, and then I'm going to show you how to measure and cut if you don't want to get the pattern. So I'm placing this line on the fold. You're just going to make sure these lines are lined up with the edges. And then you're simply going to take your ruler, place it right on that line, and cut. Makes it super quick and fast. But there is another way that you can do it. And I'm going to turn this over just so I can do this nice and easy right-handed. You're going to center your fabric. So basically, this line is the center. We're about 1/8 of an inch to either side of the 1-inch lines on the side. So if you want to mark this with your pen, you're putting a mark 3/8 of an inch along this fold. So basically at that 1/4 inch mark, since the edge is at 1/8 of an inch, and then 3/4 of an inch down. Then you just take your ruler, match those points, and cut. Or you can just use the ruler and set it up at the 3/8 and the 3/4 inch down and cut that angle. So whichever way you want to do it, you're going to have the same result. Then I like to just take 2 straight pins and put them right in the center, because then I can sew all the way around this without having to deal with the pins, and it holds the fabric in place just fine. Now we're going to head to the sewing machine. We're going to sew up here around the top and down here, leaving this end open for turning, and we're going to do that with a 1/4 inch seam. To avoid knots like this, called bird's nests, where the top thread is pulled down when you first start sewing and creates a knot with the bobbin thread, I want a beautiful start like this. I'm going to be using a leader fabric. And a leader fabric is basically just a piece of scrap fabric that you're going to start on. So if there are any knots, they're going to be on here and not on your project. So I just take a few stitches on that. And I use this whenever I'm starting off of the edge of the fabric of a project. If you're starting in the center or somewhere where on your finished project, you're going to see both where the bobbin and the top thread are, then I would pull up the bobbin thread. But for anything like this, where we're starting off the edge, the leader fabric is faster and does the job. So now we sew onto the project, back stitch a few stitches, and we're just going to go around with a 1/4 inch seam. Now that I have that sewn, I'm going to take the pins out, and I'm going to flip my mat over. This is a Riley Blake mat, and I love it because it is dark on one side and light on the other. I should have had this dark side up when we cut, but you can see this white way better. I apologize for not using this side of the mat when we were cutting these angles, but this way it's going to be easier for you to see how I'm going to notch these corners. So it's basically like clipping the corners. Make sure you're not cutting the stitching, but I just like to do 2 little cuts. So it's more like notching. If you sew clothing, this is going to look really familiar, like cutting out all those little triangles. And I like to do it at both of the points that are going to be creating this shape, because you need to take some of this fabric out so that when you turn it right side out, it's going to press well and you're not going to be struggling against the fabric at these points. So we have those 4 notched out. Now we just need to turn this right side out. You can just do it by hand, but because it is so stiff with the interfacing and the fabric, it is kind of difficult and takes a while. So I like to get my tube turner. This is a 1/2 inch tube turner. It is a hard plastic tube and a dowel rod with a dull point on the end. Now, if you are turning tubes that are just fabric, a lot of people have been using boba straws recently, which works great. I don't think it will work with this because it's a little bit too stiff. I think your straw will bend. So you just push this into the tube, and then you push the tip in, and you want to be gentle with this part. You want to just get it so that the fabric is going into that tube. I can feel that it has gone in. And then often you'll just keep pushing until it comes out this end. But I'm worried that that will cause too much pressure on the fabric and that we might bust through it. So I get it so that it's in there, and then I just push that back and then take the tube off. And now I already have this dowel rod in here so that I can use it to gently push out the points. You always want to just go slowly and gently, kind of pushing this tip along the seam line until you get to these corners that we notched. And you'll know it's done when that top is 1 inch wide. See, it is 1 inch from here to here. Okay, so when we're happy with that, get our ironing board back. And now we just need to press it flat, making sure that this doesn't pinch. We don't want the seam pinched inside. So I like to kind of roll it with my fingers. We're making sure that that stitching and the seam is on the outer edge so that the entire length of this is going to be 1 inch wide. You can also take the dowel rod and run it along that seam again to kind of help with that process. But you want it so that you're not seeing the fabric from the back on the front or the front from the back. And there's really no front or back to this yet. Okay, so I do one side and then I come back and I do the other side. You can also use your clapper if you have one. After you press that, you just press down on the fabric. It absorbs some of the heat and it really flattens the edges. So that is looking good. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to zigzag across the edge, or if you have a serger, you just serge along that edge to prevent fraying. I've changed my presser foot so that I can do a zigzag stitch, and we're going to do it to go right along the edge, or you can use an overlock stitch depending on what stitches your machine has, or if you have a serger, just serge right along there. Basically, we want to prevent this from happening as you're using your lipstick holders. Because I don't do a lot of zigzag, I always test the length and width of my zigzag before I put it on my project. I'm going to do the length of 1.1 and a width of 4.1. Pretty sure that is what I had decided in the pattern. So let's just test that and see what it looks like. It's a little bit skinny for really going over that edge. And I went back and looked at the pattern again, and I actually used 4.4 wide. So let's try that. This is why I test. Okay, that is a lot better. So we don't need the zigzag to be super close together. We're not doing a defined applique. This is really functional just to make sure this all stays in place and doesn't fray. So that is going to be a much better width. So let's get that done. So now we have that nice and finished, and it is time to press and fold this up, and then we will just stitch around, put the Key Fob hardware on, and it will be done. So let me know in the comments who you would make a lip balm or lipstick holder for, and please don't forget to put yourself on the list. As I was editing the video, I realized that I forgot to show you what side to fold if you're using directional fabric. So this side, the print is upside down. Then on this side, the print is right side up. The leaves are going up this way, like that. So if you chose a directional fabric, just remember, one side, it's going to be right side up. The other side, it will be upside down. Before you start folding and pressing, have the right side up, right side up. I hope you're not feeling double-crossed, as my nephew likes to say, because I'm bringing out another tool. First, I showed you the clapper that I hadn't shown you in the beginning, and the tube turner, and now I'm going to show you the hot ruler. You don't have to have these things, but they just make this project a little bit easier. So a hot ruler, if you haven't seen it before, it's flexible, it's kind of fuzzy. The texture helps hold the fabric in place, and you can iron right on it. So the first thing we are doing is we are going to be folding this up from the zigzag edge 1 inch and pressing. So what I do is I just put the fabric underneath the hot ruler, and I'm going to make sure that this line, and it's any random line, is lined up along the edge. We don't want it to be crooked, or we're going to have a crooked fold. So my zigzag is at the 1 inch, and then I can just press right on there. Now this does have a little bit of thickness to it, so I often come back and do my pressing one more time after using a hot ruler. Now you obviously don't need to do that. You could also just take your ruler, sit it next to it, fold it up 1 inch, and press. So you can use the same technique to do the next fold, which is going to be 2.5 inches up, but I'm going to show you this time using the ruler. So you're going to be using what you have, and you've seen both ways. So I'm going to put this fold at the 2.5 inch mark, and then I'm just going to put my thumb right at the top of the ruler, fold this up, lining up the edges, and that should be 2.5 inches. Double check it. Yep, it is. And then press. Then I'm just going to take 2 clips to hold that together. Now you'll notice here there's a little thread sticking out. So I'm going to make sure I get that trimmed. I didn't cut that properly. And then as we sew, we also want to make sure little edges like that don't stick out. So I'll show you at the sewing machine, but I basically just push that under as I'm sewing if it's sticking out, because we want a nice clean edge to this. So now we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew up, around, and down about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Don't sew across this bottom. You want that open because you want all the space for the lipstick or the lip balm. And if you pinched it down there, it's going to push everything back up and it's not going to look quite as good. So we're just sewing here, 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 here. I've changed back to my 1/4 inch walking foot because this is pretty thick. It's a lot of layers that we're going to be sewing through. So using a walking foot is going to just help everything move evenly instead of just relying on those feed dogs. So if you are going to be making a bunch of these as gifts or to sew and sell, you would want to batch them. Get everything to the point where you need to zigzag, then change your needle, do all your zigzags, or use your serger, do all your serging, then come back and do top stitching on all of them. Now I'm going to show you how to use a hump jumper and also how to pull up your bobbin thread. Hump jumper basically means a way to use extra fabric to keep your presser foot even so that it's not starting at an angle, and it also gives your feed dogs a little something more to work with as you start off the edge of something thick. So what I have done is I've just taken fabric, folded it, zigzagged. I use these to hang up quilts. So I'll like pin them on the back of a quilt and then I can put a dowel rod through there. But I also use them as these hump jumpers, and I just pile them up so that they're about the same height as my project. Then I'll push that back. We're not going to sew in those at all. They're just used for support. Then I'm going to put my project right there. And then I'm going to put my foot down so that when my needle goes down, it's going to be in the project. So this is just going to push off the back. I'm going to hold my top thread. Don't want it under the presser foot, just hold it. Put your needle down, lift your needle, and give a little tug, and you can see that bobbin thread come up. Now, the reason we're doing this is so we don't get those knots that we talked about with the leader fabric. And even though we're kind of starting at the edge, I don't like how it looks to use a leader fabric on this finished project. It looks better to pull up the bobbin thread. So now I have both the bobbin and the top thread in my fingers. I use the tweezers so that I don't poke myself on there. And it's also handy to then push these threads down so that I can easily have them under the presser foot and pull them back. Now I'm going to hold that tight, but not so tight that I'm pulling the thread. Now I'm going to take like 2 to 3 stitches forward and then back, all the while holding my thread. Once you get that knotted, you can let go of your thread and you can get moving. Now you'll see that just popped off the back. Now we're getting to that point where I said you need to be careful. You need to watch out that the zigzag part isn't sticking out. So I take my tweezers again, I just kind of push that under a teeny bit so that it's still going to be caught, but we don't want it sticking out there. Then I'm going to use the side of my scissors to hold down that fabric to make sure we get over that lump nicely. Now, because most of the strain will be right here at that fold when you're putting your lipstick or your lip balm in and out, I like to double back on there for extra strength and then just keep going. And just go slowly because again, this is pretty thick. I'm going to be pushing that under. I'm going to help the presser foot get up here by kind of pressing down on that fabric until make sure it gets under the presser foot. Sometimes if you don't do that, it'll get flapped up. Your presser foot will push it instead of going on top of it. Ooh, that's trying to stick out again. So I'm going to pause, get that pushed under, and keep going. And now all we need to do is add the Key Fob hardware. Our final step is to get this Key Fob hardware, which is open, has a little clip there, onto the fabric so that it works like this. So basically, the hardware is a piece of metal that you're going to squeeze shut with the pliers and attach to this fabric. It's got a little hook that is going to help dig into the fabric to keep it in place. Sometimes people will put a little bit of glue like E6000 in there. I don't think there's going to be a lot of pressure on your lipstick holder pulling, so I don't do that, but that is something that some people do. Now, the way I install these, I like to put it into my pliers first. So I'm just placing it there. I'm not squeezing, I'm just holding it so that it holds in place and making sure the front edge of the metal is lined up with the front edge of the silicone and that this keychain isn't in my way. Also, some people will take these off. I don't feel it's necessary, so it's just another thing to do on and off, so I just leave them there. Then you're going to take the holder and you're going to line this 1 inch up so that it is centered in that metal. Just kind of check both sides, make sure it's lined up. You don't want it partly in. Press that fabric against the fold of the Key Fob hardware. And when you're happy with where it's going to be, you're just going to squeeze. I squeeze a little bit to put it in place, and then I always do 2 hands to make sure it is nice and tight. And look at that. that's it. It is done. And this size is going to work perfect for an average size lipstick because we don't want it to be bouncing over top of that. And it also works great for lip balm, chapstick, Burt's Bees, whatever brand you prefer. This is always a little bit shorter than a lipstick, so I make sure the size works for both. But look how cute that is. So you could put your keys on there, so you have a keychain and your lipstick is always at the ready. Or like I did with this one, you can add a lobster clasp, and you can do a small lobster clasp, a large one like this, whatever you want. This way I can hook that right onto a bag. So now that lipstick holder is ready to go. It would be really cute to pair with a coordinating fabric wristlet keychain and an eyeglass case. I think this is just like the perfect gift for a coworker, stocking stuffer, Mother's Day, teacher appreciation, all the times where you just want to make something, maybe using your fabric scraps, that says, thank you so much, I appreciate you, it's coordinated, people appreciate that, and it's not going to take a ton of time. Of course, don't forget to make something like this for yourself. How much fun are these? These are reversible headbands with a little piece of elastic in 6 different sizes. So we can go from adult to baby. This is a size that I wear. It's the adult small medium. It is 21 inches, got some stretch to it. I use a 1/2 inch elastic. And all you do is you kind of stretch it to get it over your head. Get your hair out of the way. Pull the elastic against the back of your neck, make sure it's kind of even. And then just push it up, push your hair out if you want a little bit, and you are ready to go. No digging into the side of your head, super comfortable. I absolutely love it. You could probably make these in 10 to 15 minutes once you give 1 or 2 a try. So let me show you how easy these are to make. Here's what I'm going to be using to make a double-sided fabric headband with a piece of flat elastic. I'm using 1/2 inch flat elastic. You could also use 1 inch, but this is just what I happen to have. I like how it stretches and I like the thickness of it on my head. So we're going to make an adult size. Also, I have a pattern in my Etsy shop that gives you 5 other sizes from large adult all the way down to baby. So for the adult, if you didn't want to get the pattern, let me measure this out for you. You're basically going to take a piece of paper that is 9 inches top to bottom, and then you're going to cut angles on each side so that the top is 1.5 inches and the bottom is 2.5 inches. Now, the reason I decided to do this size, so that it will be basically 2 inches wide at the thickest, it's kind of a fun, thick size for prints, so you can really see what's going on. And if you're a quilter, this is a great way to use up some of your extra 2.5 inch strips. If you're not a quilter, totally fine. Find some long scraps of fabric and you will also be good to go. So you need 2 pieces of fabric, one for the one side and one for the other. It's reversible, so it doesn't really matter which is which. I'm going to use a bobbin thread to match this fabric. So when I go and top stitch at the end, I like to use top thread and bobbin thread that matches the fabric on each side. It makes it more subtle, it holds it together, but if you're not perfectly straight as you sew, it's not going to be noticeable. So for like this one, I used a red top thread and a black bobbin. For this, I'll keep the white top thread and just switch out the bobbin to a yellow. We need some pins. I'm going to show you how I use a hot ruler to make one of the turning parts a little bit easier. You can do it with and without, but this is one of my favorite tools, so I like to show you how that's used. Rotary cutter and acrylic ruler. I also like to use my tube turner to get this turned right side out. It works really well, with the exception of maybe the baby one. It gets a little hard to use on this size because the elastic is so close to how wide this is. So you will probably need to use a safety pin for this one, but this works mostly for the others, and I'll show you how it's going to work with this. We're going to start by cutting the template. And with most patterns, they would say, cut the template from 2 different fabrics. I do it a different way, just to be faster and more efficient. Now you'll notice this is a directional fabric. The chicken heads are all on this side and their bottoms are on this side. You want to make sure your direction is going the short way and not the long way. Otherwise you would have chickens sliding off, like they would be right side up on one side of your head and upside down on the other. So I like them this way. And as luck would have it, that is how these strips are always cut. I am going to grab my rotary cutting mat. If you have one of these, it makes cutting this pretty handy. You don't have to have one. You can obviously just move the fabric. Now with a printed template, you can kind of look if you have the room and the length and decide like what part you want to be in the middle and kind of say, okay, I want this black chicken in the center of my headband. So I'm going to fold it right there. You don't have to do that, but that's one way you can really be particular about what is on your headband. And you can pin and cut this, but since I'm using a rotary cutter and a ruler, I usually don't. I do this. I put this down and I have it covering the whole template and lined up on the edge. And then I cut that side. And then I just gently pivot my ruler so that it is lined up with this end. And I cut that end. Now I keep everything in place and I spin this around. This is why I like to use this rotating mat, or you can spin your entire mat, or you can just move your fabric, obviously. And then I just slide this over and then do the other side. So my fabric and my template have never moved. I don't have to line it back up and it is good to go. Now we have our fabric piece. Put that like that. And we have the other fabric that we're going to use for the other side. Oh, and we have our elastic. When I was testing this pattern, I tried it a couple different ways. I figured out exactly how long this elastic was going to need to be the size that I wanted this to be for my head. So a standard, like small, medium, adult, if your head is about 21.5 to 22 inches around, you're going to want your headband to be about 22 inches. So kind of did the math, how this was going to be, what the elastic needed to be, but I don't know, something shifted a little bit and it wasn't quite long enough. So in my pattern, I always call for much longer elastic than you think you need so that you can adjust it if needed. So this is 8 inches long. Now, before we clip and pin any of this together, we are going to use the hot ruler. We're going to iron 1/4 inch on one end of this fabric and one short end of this fabric. And the reason I do this, I've tried it both ways, and I like to show you the quick and easy ways when I do my tutorials. When we're going to sew this together, the elastic is going to get sewn into one of these ends as we sew around. Then we're going to turn it right side out, and we're going to have to fold this end in. But I have found that if you pre-press, it helps a lot. All right, so I'm just going to put a piece of dark canvas down on my ironing surface so that you can see what I'm doing. You could do fabric, whatever you want. I'm just doing this because it was the closest at hand. Okay, that's much better. You're going to be able to see and not be trying to look at white on white. So you want a straight line on your uncut fabric, and then you're going to take one of the short ends on your cut fabric, and I'm going to put this hot ruler on here and just push that back. So we're folding wrong side to wrong side, about 1/4 inch. If you do it a little bit more, not a big deal. This hot ruler is just really nice because you can iron right on it, and it's really easy to see that it is straight across. Now this is so small, it's pretty easy to fold by yourself as well, but I just like me a hot ruler. Another thing I like that I didn't have out at the beginning is a clapper. This is a hard piece of unfinished wood. You put it down when you have pressed. It takes the heat out of the fabric and helps that crease stay creasier, sharper, crisper. I don't know, what word do you use? I can never come up with my words when I'm doing my video. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this other fabric. So that's how you use a hot ruler. The longer the piece that you need to fold and press to any distance, up to 4 inches, the more handy this is, because the harder it becomes to do it on your own. So now we're going to take these fabrics, right sides together, and we're going to line up these folded edges so that they're flush. And then you're going to make sure that the cut piece covers and doesn't like go off of your other piece. Now we're going to take our elastic. I'm going to put it down the center of the fabric because we need it in between these two layers. And you need it laying nice and flat. And then you need it to be lined up with the edge of the cut one and in the center. You don't want the edge of the elastic to be caught in your side seam allowances. And then if you want to, you can cut this now. I'm going to cut it later. So I'm just going to use a pin and pin those 3 together, the elastic and the 2 layers of fabric. Make sure that all stays flat. And then I'm going to put 2 more pins down the center just to keep everything in place for when we go to sew. Okay, now before we go and sew, I'm going to come back to these folded edges and I'm going to open them up. I found you get a better finish if you sew with them open instead of folded back and then flip them, and then our original crease is going to make it easier to turn right side up. You'll see. I don't know, it's sounding complicated to me as I'm trying to explain it. But what we're going to do now is we're going to sew all the way down here, across and up here with a 1/4 inch seam, and we're going to double back where the elastic is to give it nice stability. Now we have sewn the cut fabric and the elastic onto the back, and now we're just going to trim the back fabric to the size of the template shaped fabric. I find this to be so much faster and easier when you're sewing 2 shapes together to just cut one if you have another piece of fabric that is a little bit bigger and you can make sure you're not going to go over the edges. I do this a lot with baby things as well. Now I'm just going to take scissors, and I'm not going to cut on the open end, but I'm going to trim the corners on the end where we sewed it shut. And I'm not going to trim that elastic that's in there. And then just make sure that you're not cutting your stitches. Now comes the trickier part of turning it right side out. So I'm going to be using this tube turner. Sometimes people are telling me they're using boba straws and chopsticks. Might work for this. The one thing you have to be careful about is when you put this in, you want it to go in front or behind the elastic and not push the elastic so that it folds up in there, because then it's not going to work. If that happens, just take this out, flatten that elastic back out, and try again. So I'm just going to put this in here. Oop, that elastic started to bend. I could feel it, so I made sure it went in front of it. So now it's to the bottom. Then I'm going to take the rounded end. I'm going to push that into the tube. And then when it comes out, I'm just going to pull the tube down. I don't want to push it all the way out because you risk pushing that point through your stitching. But before I take the dowel rod out, I'm going to just gently push on those corners to make those nice and flat, and then just dump it out. Love that thing. All right, we're going to get our ironing surface back up here. And now we just need to press this flat so that the seams are on the edge. We don't want to see any white from the yellow side or any yellow from the white side if we have done our job. You also want to be careful about how much you let the iron touch elastic. I don't know if you remember when we were all sewing masks because you couldn't find any way back in 2020. You had to be careful to not melt that elastic as well. So I just do little bits at a time. I just kind of take my fingers and roll the fabric until I have that seam where I want it and get it ready for a few inches. And then I'll press and then keep going. These headbands are a great way to use 2.5 inch strips if you're a quilter. Also a great way to use your fabric scraps. Everyone has fabric scraps, right? And they sew up so quickly. Think gifts, stocking stuffers, birthday gifts, themed gifts, etc. So let me know in the comments who you're going to make these for. Make sure you're on the list, and what kinds of fabrics you might use. I'm always curious. Now when you get close to the end, don't press the end completely because you don't want to get rid of that fold that we put in at the beginning. So I'm going to press to about 1 inch from the open end, and then you can kind of see that fold line, and I'm just going to push that down. And that makes getting this in here evenly so much easier than just trying to do it from unpre-pressed, because getting these seams on the sides down flat in such a skinny little space, it gets tricky. Sometimes I take the dowel rod just to kind of push that seam over. So I want that to be as straight as possible. Once you make 1 or 2 of these, you can probably do them in 10 to 15 minutes. They get really quick. And if you're mass producing, like to sew and sell, you just do each step at the same time. So do all of your cutting, do all of your pinning, do all of your sewing, do all of your pressing, etc. So now we have our reversible headband and our big piece of elastic in an open end. Now it is time to make the final sizing. So if I was just making these to sell and I wanted to do the most common size, I would say, okay, look at my template, 22 inches. So I would fold this in half and I would place it on my mat, or you could put it against a ruler, and half of 22 is 11. So I would have this all flat, 11 inches is right here, and then I would just fold that elastic back. So you'll see, like I said, I like way extra elastic. You can trim that once we are sure about the fit. Because this is for me, I'm gonna set it to 22, and I'm gonna test it on myself before I sew it together. I just wanna make sure it's comfortable. It's not too tight, it's not too stretched, etc. So I'm just going to put a safety pin there. And now I'm gonna try it on my head. Look how cute this is. I mean, you can still see the elastic. That won't be there once we tuck it inside and sew it, but I am really happy with the feel. It's not too tight. It's not too loose that it's gonna fall off. Yeah, I really like it. This is gonna be fantastic when I just want my hair out of my face so that I can cut, sew, paint, whatever, or just, you know, keep my hair out of my face when it's warm for summer. So I'm happy with the size. I'm gonna take it off. We're gonna go back to the workstation. I'm going to cut a little bit of that extra off. We don't need that much stuck in there. And I'm gonna mark, and we're gonna sew this thing together. So the 22 inches works really well on me. I'm gonna cut off a few inches here. I'm gonna put an itty bitty mark above where the edge of the fabric is, so I know I want that inside. Take this little safety pin off, tuck that in, just past that little mark, and then I'm gonna put a clip. Now we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew all the way around, and it is gonna be all done. Super quick and easy. Because I have basically a yellow fabric on one side and white on the other, I wanna use white and yellow thread. And when I'm using a bunch of different ones, if I'm keeping changing, I usually like to change the bobbin thread if I have the choice. It's just a lot faster than rethreading my entire machine. So I switched that to yellow. And then I'll just flip this over so that the white will have the top thread and the yellow will have the bobbin thread. Because both sides of the stitching are going to show, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread so that I don't end up with nasty knots. Here's my example. This can happen when you just start sewing. Sometimes the sewing machine will suck down the top thread, like this end here, and make this complete mess. And you certainly don't want that on the outside of a reversible anything, or on anything if you don't want to. You want it to look like this. This is back and forth and it's knotted and it looks beautiful. So the way we're gonna do that is by pulling up the bobbin thread. So you're going to hold your top thread, put your foot down, and I usually start a few inches from the edge where we're going to be back stitching for the elastic. Put the needle down while holding your thread, lift it up, give a little tug, and you can see the bobbin thread there. Now I always keep tweezers so that I can grab that without poking my finger. Then I have both threads in my hand. I use my tweezers to push them down so I can get them under the presser foot. And now I'm holding them. I'm not pulling, but I am holding that nice and taut. Now I'm going to take about 2 to 3 stitches forward and then back, all the while holding the thread, because that is going to make sure we don't end up with one of those ugly knots. Now I'm going to sew all the way around, about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now when we turn, this is where we put that in, so it might move a little bit. You want to make sure you have it aligned so it's centered and it's straight. It's not like crooked. You want it to look good. And to make sure it's nice and secure, you want to sew back over it and then over it again. You're not going to need to do that on the other side because this one has already been sewn twice, so you can just go over it once when we get there. I'm just going to keep sewing, and as I go, I'll just pull this so that it stays flat as it gets to the presser foot. And that is how easy they are to make. So you can see it's top stitched in yellow here and white on the back, so it's subtle. If it wasn't perfectly straight, you're not really seeing that. This is the adult small medium. This is for bigger, like a bigger or with thicker hair, tween, child, toddler, and a baby. So really about 1/2 inch to 1 inch difference in each of these. If you want more elastic, less fabric, you can adjust them, but let me know in the comments who you're gonna make these for and what types of fabrics. Are you going to do seasonal? Are you just going to do favorite colors? I would love to know how you're going to use this. Big thumbs up for this project. It is a great way to use your 2.5-inch fabric strips. It is also a great way to use up your fabric scraps. Perfect gift, sew and sell. Put it in a little gift basket for a girls' trip, for a slumber party, for a spa day. Keep your hair back, do your little facials together. So many ways to go. If you're looking for ways to use your fabric scraps, why not consider replacing your disposable makeup removers with cute and functional reusable makeup removers? These are made from fabric scraps and baby washcloths. If it's soft enough for a baby, it is soft enough for my face. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these. And at the end, I will also show you how to make a cute and simple drawstring bag if you want to use them to give these as a gift or to sew and sell. Let's get into it. All right, I'm in the baby aisle and we're going to do some math because I think these would be really soft and nice for reusable makeup removal pads. So let's see which is going to be a better deal. You can buy 6 washcloths. They are $8.48 and they are 9 by 9. So you get about 54 by 54 less whatever this edging is, which we would need to cut off. Okay, so that's one option. The next option is to just buy a big towel. I would feel really bad to cut that little face off, but let's see where the money goes. So this is 26 by 30 and it's $9.48. So this is definitely less material for the price. Winner chicken dinner, baby washcloths, because if they're good enough for baby, they're going to be nice and soft on your face. So today's goal is to replace these cotton rounds with something reusable that I can just throw in the laundry. This will be great for myself, also a great gift for teens or anyone who uses makeup and you just want to grab some fabric scraps and do something different. So first I want to look at how big this is. And this is just under 2.5 inches round. I've seen a lot of these made and being sold on Etsy and other places with a serger. And then they do the circles because it's really easy to just serge around it. I don't have a serger, so I am going to make squares. Let's take a look at these baby washcloths that we grabbed at Walmart. I'm going to save that ribbon for something else. That's a good piece of ribbon. And these are craft scissors, not fabric scissors, so I can cut all these plastic things with it without anybody needing to freak out, including myself. So we'll just take a look at one. So these are 9 by 9, but we need to cut off the edge. And I think we need to iron it first because we want this to be nice and smooth when we are cutting, and we also want our scrap fabric to be nice and smooth. I have these all ironed nice and flat, and I ironed my scrap fabrics that I'm going to use. Now, to be most efficient with this, because these are 9 by 9, but we need to cut this off, I'm going to cut these into 8-inch squares. And I thought using the rotating cutting mat would make that easy. I'm just cutting a little bit off. Let's see. So we have 2 sides that are squared. And it's going to be right here. So it looks like it might have a teeny bit of that curved bias binding, but that's going to end up in the seam allowance. So I think this is going to work. All right, so we have 8 by 8, and now we are going to cut it into 4 4-inch squares. Okay, so from one we get 4 squares, but they happen to be doubled, but it's very thin. So I'm going to keep them together. So I'm going to use the 2 layers for each of mine. So from one set of 6 towels, we are going to be able to make 24 of these reusable face cleaners if we cut them to 4 by 4. And they were $8.48 when I bought them, divided by 24. That's going to be 35 cents each for your material. And then I'm using fabric scraps, so I'm calling that a sunk cost. You need to know these things if you're going to sew and sell, or if you're on a budget for gift making and you want to try and keep things in a certain range. So always do your calculations and figure out your cost per unit. And because this fabric is so stretchy, it really makes using this rotary mat that much easier, because having to shift and line it up each time becomes a little bit more difficult when you're using something stretchy like this. And I'm just kind of stacking them so they're tilted just so the two pieces stay together. And once I get all of those cut, I'm going to just cut my scraps into 4x4 pieces as well. And I'm using scraps from my Honeybees and Sunflowers Please fabric that came out from Riley Blake Designs in March of 2023. Often for older fabrics, you might be able to find it on Etsy, easier than in shops, but do check your local shops if they carry Riley Blake fabric as well. You could make these all the same fabric. You could do a variety like I am. It just really depends if you're starting from bigger pieces of fabric or if you're trying to use up some of your scraps from your scrap bin. Let me know in the comments what you think. Who are you going to make this for? Are you going to use one fabric? Are you going to use a few? I'd love to know. Now that we have a lot of these cut, we're going to put the washcloth microfiber material on the right side of our fabric. And then I'm going to use clips. And we're going to sew all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam and leave maybe 2 inches open on one side for turning. I'm going to put them on a design board as I get them clipped together. Usually I use this for quilting to organize quilt blocks, but it is going to be a good way to move these from my workspace over to my sewing machine. And if you want to learn how to make these, it's just foam core, extra batting, and fabric on the edge. I will put a link to the video tutorial. Okay, I have 8 ready, so let's just go sew those together and see how this turns out. So now I'm just going to sew around, leave about 2 inches open to turn with a 1/4 inch seam. And I am using a walking foot, or on the Janome it's called an AccuFeed foot, that helps move the top fabric as well as the bottom is being moved by the feed dogs on the machine. This is pretty stretchy. I'm just using a regular stitch and trying to hold it all in place. If it stretches a teeny bit, we're going to be clipping those corners anyway, so it should be fine. As you can see, when they were cut, it was a good square, but it did push a little bit and stretch. Since I did the original filming, I figured out a way to do these faster. You don't actually have to clip these together, which is going to save a ton of time. I'm making more, and I just put the fabrics in piles, and then I'm just going to put this square right on top. It stretches a little bit just as much whether you pin it ahead of time or not. So I'm just going to put it down and I'm going to hold it in place with my hands. So being able to just take them from the pile, put them together and start sewing is going to be a big time saver if you're either making a bunch just for yourself or for gifts, or if this is something that you want to add to your sew and sell project list. Now I'm just going to turn that over and I'm going to clip those corners. Make sure you don't clip the stitching. You're just trying to get some of that bulk out that needs to turn into that corner. Because again, it is a face cleaner, I'm not super concerned about these corners being super sharp. Here's one that I did. I'm fine with them being kind of curved. It actually gives it kind of a nice shape for this. But if you want it to be sharper, I will put a link to a video that shows you how to add little pieces of thread to make these corners sharper. It's just, to me, not something that's worth it for this kind of a project. Now I'm just going to turn this right side out and then we're going to press it. You will also notice there's a bit of fuzz, so you are going to need to be aware and probably clean. If you have a top loading like me, you're going to need to clean your sewing machine definitely when you're done with this. And if you're making a lot of them, you might want to double check it after you've done, I don't know, 10 or 12, just to make sure you don't have a ton of fuzz in there that is going to mess up your machine. All right, so now we're going to press it and we're going to press that opening under. Now I have them all sewn together and pressed. Look how cute. And now I just need to top stitch around the edges. I want to keep the white on the top. So I put a navy blue bobbin thread and then I'll use white for the top thread. And because I don't want a knot on the other side, I'm going to raise my bobbin thread. So foot down, needle up, give a tug. I feel like I've shown this so many times, but I know it'll be new to somebody. Okay, grab it with my tweezers, put it under the foot, and I'm going to hold both the top and the bobbin thread right here while I take about 2 stitches forward and back. And that just keeps that from getting pulled down into the machine and creating a knot. So look how cute. Edge stitched, it's soft. We're going to have to give it a try. So I'm just going to do that for all of the squares. So now I have all 8 done. Super cute. And you can either just give, keep, store, sell them like this, or you can create a little bag. I've seen people make little mesh bags so they can put them through the laundry, but a lot of times the mesh bag they put them in isn't going to separate these enough for them to actually get clean. You need one that's kind of big so these can move around. I'm going to do just a simple drawstring bag that would be great for gifting or selling these. So what I've done is I've taken more extra of this fabric that matches some, and it is 7.5 inches wide by 19.5 inches high. Or you could do two 7.5 inches by 10 inches, and that's going to be nice and roomy for these and include a drawstring. So I pretty much have about 2 inches on each side because we need to have that, and then you need about 2 inches to come down to make that drawstring channel. So I could make it a little shorter. Let's see. Nah, I'm going to keep it like this. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to fold it in half, right sides together. Now I'm just going to line it up on my grid, and I'm going to make a mark 2 inches down on each side. And that's going to become the channel for the drawstring. Now I'm just going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam from those lines that we marked down to the bottom on each side. Now you could do a French seam. We're not doing that with this one. We're just having a raw edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a wavy rotary cutter, or you could use pinking shears, and I'm going to cut along the stitch line, just up to this line. Don't go all the way up, making sure that I don't cut the stitches. And that is going to help it not fray. Next, I'm going to clip on that line just to where the stitch line would be. That's going to help us fold that channel in nice and easily. I'm going to bring my ironing board over. I'm going to grab my hot ruler, which is, if you haven't seen it, is kind of flexible, almost feels fuzzy, like, I don't know, felted, but it has all the measurements. I can put it on here. We want to fold and press this a 1/4 inch, so it makes it really easy. I just fold it down, make sure it's on that line, and I can iron right on top of this ruler. Gets a really quick straight edge. And I'm going to flip it over and do the same. Now when you're doing the second one, you want to make sure it's going to be even with the first one. So if you have to fold it down a teeny bit more, you can. You just want them to line up. So that's part one. Part one should have been fold the sides in and press. So my clapper not only helps make the creases nice and crisp, but it also pulls the heat out of the fabric. And so then it's not going into my fingers. Instead, it is going into the wood. So I apologize. This should have been the first step. But as you can see, you can make it the second step if you get ahead of yourself like I did. I'm going to refold the top folds that we did. Press those. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew all 4 of these just to hold this in place so that it doesn't come out and fray. And then what we'll do is we will fold this down and make our channel for our drawstring. But first we're going to sew these 4 sections. So I'm going to use a leader fabric. I'll just make things go faster, which is basically a scrap of fabric that I can start on, and any knots will go there, so I don't have to pull up my bobbin thread for all 4 of these small spots. And then when I get onto my project, I'll take a couple of stitches back. Now when I'm doing this, you want to make sure the other side is folded down. You don't want to be sewing these together. You want to be sewing each side individually. And then you just trim that leader fabric off and do the other one. Do this one from the front so I can use the leader fabric easily again. And then I'm going to fold down the side that we just did, and we're going to do the other side. Now we have those edges sewn. That helps keep this folded down and the sides folded in. And now we're just going to fold it down so that this fold is just below where we stopped sewing. I'm going to fold the other one. I'm going to press them at the same time just to make sure they're even. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew all the way around, and I'll just fold the seam allowance so that it tucks under one of these sides. Now, because of the style sewing machine I have, I can't fit bags and things to go around because nothing comes off. This table will come off, but it stays this wide. So I always have to sew bags and things like that from the inside where my top is going to the inside. If you can put this around the throat of your machine, you're going to leave yours like this and sew. But I have to turn it right side out and do it the opposite way. So it totally depends on your sewing machine. So I'm going to just lay this seam allowance down flat. I'm going to start back here. And I am going to pull up my bobbin thread, especially since my bobbin thread is on the outside of the bag. And I don't want a knot on the outside of the bag. And now I'm just going to sew all the way around. And this is making the channel for our drawstring. And then when I get here, I need to lay that seam allowance flat again. So let's see how this turned out. I think it could have been a bit shorter. Let's try it. Put these in here, nice, very roomy for sure. They're coming to here. So we could have done about 2 inches shorter, but this will be a nice, cute little bag. Makes the gift look bigger if you're doing it as a gift. Easy to put them in and out. And could just be a bag to be used for something else later. I'm going to try using white rickrack for my ties because I think that would be fun. So to do your ties, because we have this open on both sides, I'm going to put 2 sets so we can just pull like this. Each string or ribbon or whatever you have needs to be twice the width of your bag plus a few inches. Just be a little bit generous because you can always trim that, but you don't want it to be difficult when you're getting it together. So I just measured the one, and then I will just make this one the same size. And then you could use a safety pin, but I am going to try this threader set. It comes with 5 of them and see how I like it. I think it's supposed to be faster. So we put whatever you're threading through there, double it over a bit, and then I'm just going to feed the stick through. Much easier on your hands than using a safety pin. I like it. And then you're going to bring it back through so that it comes out the other side. And using this is also why you want it to be generous. Oh my gosh, that was so easy. I love these. I'll put a link. Now for the second one, you want your ends to come out of this side. So we're going to start and stop on the side where we just looped with the first one. This is one of those inexpensive tools that if you do a lot of drawstrings or bags like that, definitely going to be worth the investment. And because it comes with multiples, it could be easy to use with a group if you're teaching 4-H kids or scouts to sew. So now you want to make sure these strings stay at least so that they are flat. So I made these way too long. Then I'm just going to knot them and then just trim about a 1/4 inch from the knot. And I'll knot this side. I usually try and make it about the same length. Clip that. And then you just put your reusable makeup removers and then you just pull and it's in a cute little bag. Okay, let's see how it works. I haven't used one before, so you're in it with me. Glasses off. Grab my makeup remover. Okay, put some of that on there. It's nice and soft, I will say that. All right, so there's all my makeup from this eye. Now let's see if it rinses out pretty well. I know I would put it through the laundry too, but just to see if we can get some of it out right away with soap. Yeah, that gets a lot cleaner than I expected. And that's just with hand soap really quickly in the sink. So I think I'm a convert. This is a lot bigger than using this. It's also a lot softer. And it's just going to be way more economical. So I think I'm going to add this to my list of things that I'm going to make for people in my family that want to be more eco-friendly or that I just want to make something cute because you just don't know what to get them. So let me know in the comments if you're going to try this too. My name is Tara Reed. I'm an artist, a fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs, and I love to teach easy sewing projects, how to sew and sell, things to sew and sell, and quilting for beginners. So make sure you subscribe to my channel, click that bell so that YouTube will notify you, and let's just have so much fun. Today, we're going to play with crayons. Now, originally, I had made this crayon roll-up. It has been very popular on YouTube and in my Etsy shop, where it holds 6 crayons and a little notepad. But some people didn't want the notepad, They just wanted the crayon roll-up. So that is what we are going to do today. This also is done with Velcro, and I tried that, but I found that using a little piece of 3/4 inch elastic is much easier. And I'm all about easy for something like this. I also realized that when I made it the same height, I really wasted some fabric because I don't need it this long unless you want it to fold down over to make sure the crayons aren't coming out. We're going to have a little bit above the crayons, so I don't think they're going to fall out anyway. I think we're going to do it so it's about like that. Now we're going to be making it for 8 crayons. You can make and fill 3 of these with every box of 24 crayons. They just roll up, put the elastic on there, and it is good to go. And then I also did this one that holds the entire box of 24 crayons and is double-sided. This is a nice and simple project. We need 1 piece of fabric, 1 piece of elastic, and we're going to do straight stitching, and then all you need are the crayons. So this is a great sewing for beginners, great way to teach kids or anyone to sew. So let's get started. First, for the 8 crayon roll-up, we're going to need 17.5 inches wide. I basically do the number of crayons I want in my roll-up times 2 plus 1.5 so that I have a little bit of extra for my seam when I tuck it under. Then for the 8 crayon roll-up, we're going to use 5.5 inches of 3/8 inch flat elastic. You can use other elastic. You can probably use a hairband if you want to. This is what I have, and it works great, nice and easy for everyone. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to fold this in half, wrong sides together, and I'm just going to sew down both sides. Now I'm going to be using leader fabrics for this project because it's going to be a lot faster than pulling up my bobbin thread for all of the straight stitches that we're going to be doing. So a leader fabric is basically just a little scrap of fabric. I just take extras and cut them into little pieces that I keep by my sewing machine. We're going to start sewing on the leader fabric. Leave a little bit of a gap so that it isn't underneath that. And then by the time you get to your actual project, any bird's nest or knotting that might happen is going to have happened back here on our throwaway fabric, and you can go forward and back to catch that. So you'll see the leader fabric is attached but not connected. So you're just going to cut that off, and then we will use it again over and over and over on this project. Now I am going to snip this a little bit, kind of basically like snipping the corner. Make sure you don't cut the folded part, just a little bit there so that we get a nice point when we turn this right side out. And now we're going to go back to our workspace. All right, got my handy dandy portable ironing board. If you need to make one of these, check the link below because I did post a video on how I made this and I love it. Now, what we need to do with this is we need to turn it right side out, and then the ends need to be turned under about 1/4 inch because we're going to be sewing that closed. So here is the question. Do you flip it and iron it before or after you turn it right side out? I keep changing my mind over time, but right now I have decided that it is a little bit easier to do when it is still inside out because I can visually see better how much I have flipped. So I'm just going to do that. Sometimes I will press those seams open before pressing this, but I'm not going to today. All right, so I have that. Now I'm going to turn this right side out. Get my cute little Riley Blake bird corner turner. I'm going to very gently push those corners out. And now I'm going to press this flat, making sure that everything is out at the seams. We don't want it tucked in at all so that it's not straight. We want it nice and straight. You're probably wondering where my clapper is because I am a big fan. Forgot to bring that over. And then I'm also pressing where it's folded. So now we have just a rectangle that is nice and flat. This side is folded in. And now we're going to fold up 2.5 inches for the crayon holder part. Now, here's where you can get particular if you want to make it right-handed or left-handed. Both of my parents were left-handed, so I'm always very aware of this. Basically, a right-handed is where you're going to be rolling to the right and your elastic's on the right. Left-handed would be the opposite way. So how do you do that? It all depends on which side you put the opening. If you want it to be more of a right-handed roll-up, you're going to keep the opening on the right-hand side. If you want it to be a lefty, you're going to put it here. I guess since I made this a righty, let's make this a lefty. So we have a sample of each. Now I'm going to be using this hot ruler. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. It's from Clover. It's kind of fuzzy feeling, very flexible, and you can iron on it. It's awesome. So what you do is you line up, make sure it's parallel with the side. You don't want it like that. You want to make sure you're moving things straight. And then you're just going to pull the fabric until it hits the 2.5 inch mark. And then you don't even have to move it. They make some different sizes. This is the 14 inch. It's a little bit longer. It was a little bit more expensive, but if you're going to be using it, I would get bigger rather than saving a few dollars to get the smaller one, because it's going to be a lot more versatile for you. Okay, so we have that folded. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to start stitching these lines, and we're going to do them at 1 inch intervals. That gives lots of room for kids to easily put your crayons in and out. So the first line we're going to do is on the folded side. So not this side with the opening, but the opposite side, whichever side that is on. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch or slightly less than 1/4 inch from the edge. Now, if you want to, you can go forward and back a little bit at that folded part to make it a little bit stronger. Okay, so we have our first side done. Now we need to sew in 1 inch intervals just to the edge. And I go slightly like a stitch or two over and then come back just to give that extra stability. So now the question becomes, how do you want to measure your 1 inch marks? You could take a ruler and you could draw lines with a pencil or a heat erasable pen, or you could use tape. So this is 1 inch wide. So let me show you how that would work. I would just put a piece of tape down, and because we need this to really be 1 inch, we didn't leave a lot of extra side to side. I'm going to put the tape over that stitch line. And then I like to start from this bottom folded part, which is a little trickier when I'm doing this the left-handed one. And then I need to sew right next to, but not on, the tape. I'm going to use that leader fabric for each one. Then I'm just going to take that painter's tape and move it over and sew again. So let's do the second one this way, and then I'm going to show you some other ways that you can do your markings that will be helpful, especially if you're going to be making a bunch of these. This tape will restick 8 to 10 times, and then you'll need a new piece. You can draw. We're not going to do that. You know how to do that. You can use that tape. And then the other way that I've done, especially when I'm doing a lot, is I use this foot guide. And most sewing machines come with it. It's really designed to be used on the right-hand side, like most things my parents would say, are designed to be used right-handed. There's a little hole that it pushes through, and then you would just measure how far you want it to be. Or you can use the guideline, but I find using this makes it a lot faster and easier. So this would be 1 inch to this side. But because I'm doing a lefty one, I need to go 1 inch from this side. So I did discover that I can put it the opposite way. It just sits upside down. So instead of a lot of it resting on the fabric, just this part will, but it works just as well. So I'm going to line this up so that this guide is going to run right on top of that stitching. And if I was making a bunch of these, this is what I would do, because I don't have to move it. I don't have to worry about it not sticking as much as it, like when if you're using the tape. Now we've sewn all the way across, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sewn together for the crayons. And now this is going to be our 8th, and it is also where we have the opening. So before you sew that, we need to add the elastic. So I'm just going to take my piece of elastic and fold it in half. I'm going to fold this in half just to get a feel for where the half is. It's a little bit down from that edge. And I'm going to open the fold, and I'm going to put it inside the fold of the back, not inside the crayon part fold, but this longer part here. And I'm going to put it about 1/2 inch in. Now, if you want to clip that, so it kind of stays while you get started. And now we're going to sew 1/4 inch to maybe a little bit less than 1/4 inch from that edge to make sure that that crayon space is big enough and that we are closing that folded edge. Now when I get closer to here, I make sure it's coming out straight. And I usually just use my scissors to press down on everything so that it's not going to move. So I did sew back and forth over the elastic just to make sure it really stays in there, because this is for kids, so they might be a little bit rough with it. Now you just need to go back and clip these threads, and we are ready to fill it with crayons. Now we're just going to open our crayons, and then you just slide them into each spot. And remember, if you want to do longer and have spaces for more than 8 crayons, you just change the math. You make it however many crayons you want, times 2 plus 1.5 to 2 inches. I find 1.5 works really well. You don't get a lot of extra on either end. But if you want to be more careful, you might not do your seams as evenly, then maybe add 2. And then you're going to have this 7.5 inches so that it is taller than your crayons and has this fold up area. So this is a lefty one. We're going to roll that to the left, add the elastic, and look at how cute. Ready to go, keeps it all together, great to throw in your purse, have it in the car. This is the other one that I did, where I did it the same size as my original roll-up that had the notepad, not thinking that this was so tall because of the notepad. But if you want to do it taller, you can do it where you then fold down, and that will definitely ensure that if they don't roll it tightly, nothing's going to fall out, right? Because they're in there, but these are not going anywhere. So I would save the fabric, do the slightly smaller, and then you can get 12 out of 1 yard of fabric. My name is Tara Reed. I'm an artist and a fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs. I love to teach easy sewing projects, things to sew and sell, how to sew and sell, and more. So be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can also check out my website at tarareed.com. What do you think of my new lanyard? I'm pretending I'm cool and that I work in an office where I need a badge, but I don't. But I needed something to put on here to tell you this is another lanyard sewing tutorial. This time we're doing these very popular scrunchy elastic lanyards that seem to be taking the country by storm. I don't know, maybe the world, but definitely the US. It is made with 3/4 inch elastic, and then I'm going to show you how to use pre-cut fabric. So if you're a fan of using these for quilting or other projects and you have a bin like me of extras, we're going to put these to use. If you don't have them and you never use them, not to worry, all you're going to do is cut strips of fabric that are 2.5 inches wide by the width of your fabric. Everyone is going to be good to go with this. Let me show you what you need and how easy these are to make. Got my bucket out that has strips from a few different collections. If you don't buy pre-cut strips like this, you're just going to cut lengths of fabric that are 2.5 inches wide. And honestly, you're going to have a lot less lint when you're doing this project because boy, oh boy, does that fray, which is why supply number 1 is a lint brush. You're going to have this stuff all over you. But if you sew with these, you know this already. This is not news to you. The next thing you're going to need is 35 inches of 3/4 inch wide elastic. I highly recommend a tube turner. It's going to make everything go a lot faster, but you will need a safety pin still to thread the elastic through the tube. A 1-inch key fob, and highly recommend getting the pliers with that. It works so much faster and easier than using regular pliers. Then I add a little lobster clasp. I've seen people use all different kinds. So if you have a bunch of these sitting around and it has a different end to it, maybe it's got a long one more like this, then use what you have. But I love these ones that have just a little circle to put on the end, because then it isn't going to float around all that much more. It's going to stay pretty close. It's not like flying an inch to either side. Then I'm just going to be using a teeny tiny ruler and rotary cutter because we're going to play with how we put these strips together. So let's get the supplies out of the way and talk about the fabric. So for one of these lanyards, you're going to use 2 of the 2.5 inch pre-cut strips. And I've done it 2 different ways. So this one, I just took 2 strips, I sewed them together, and I put them on the elastic, which gives me this look. The dark color, which is strip number 1 on the one side, and then the strip number 2 color on the other side. If you wanted it to look much more consistent, you would just use the same color strip twice. But I thought, well, let's just see what this is. Now you'll also notice that you can kind of see what the icons are on here, but it's more subtle because the fabric is so gathered. Now this one, it is again 2 strips, and I cut one of them in half and left this one plain. That gives me the teal at the bottom on both sides, and then this kind of lime green that goes around the neck. So a little bit of a different look. Since I showed you one where I just sewed 2 strips together and how that looks, and one where I cut 1 strip in half and sewed those together, let's do one where we cut both strips in half and make it a little bit more of, you know, color blocking. Let's do something totally different. So let's take a red, and we'll do something with like no icons this time. Let's do this wood and black. So we're gonna go bold this time. You can see all that lint. Actually, I'm gonna get some of it off before I even start. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the selvages off the bottom. This one has been in that bin for a little bit, so it's kind of folded up. One thing I love about scrunchy stuff is you don't have to iron. So you don't have to iron these tubes open before you put it onto the elastic because it's going to get all ruffled. And I showed the difference and that it wasn't a difference when I did the scrunchy key fobs. So I will put a link to how to do the scrunchy key fob video in here as well. But trust me, now we already know that we do not need to iron anything. So now I've opened these up to the folds. I'm just going to cut each of these in half. Doesn't have to be an exact science. If you wanted to cut it into more pieces, you could. If you wanted this to look even more color blocked, you could cut this into 4 pieces. But we're just going to do like each section in 4 pieces, so you would have 8. We're just going to do 4. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew red, black, and we're going to stitch these together with a 1/4 inch seam. Off to the sewing machine. So I'm going to use my little scrap leader fabric to get my thread started so I don't end up with it pulled under and knotted on my project. Just take a few stitches and then 1/4 inch seam across here. And sew these 2 together. Now I'm just going to cut off that leader fabric.
Okay.
4 pieces, we have the 3 seams together. Now it is time to sew it in half. So I'm just going to start at one end. I'm going to fold that right sides together. Use my little leader fabric again. And this is really long, so it's about 80 inches long. I just have it draped down on the floor, kind of in between my legs, because I don't feel like pinning it. Really no need to take the time to do that. So what I do is as it's coming onto the table next to my sewing machine, I'm just putting it together. So I'm just kind of doing it as we sew. And we're sewing this together with a 1/4 inch seam as well. When you get to the seams, I've tried it both ways. The first one, I tried it where I just sewed it where they were flat like this. And then the second one, I opened the seams. Actually found it easier to get the elastic through when I did it like this and not opened because nothing caught on that seam. You just want to make sure that you put all 3 of these seams, or however many you have, going in the same direction. So we're going to have, actually I'm going to just flip it so that they're all facing me. So it's really easy for the foot to go across there. I don't have to hold it down. Now make sure you do that seam in the same direction. Do the seam towards you. Now, because we're going to use a tube turner, when you get to the end, you want to sew across the end. You want one end closed. And I know you might be thinking, but then how's the elastic going to go through? We're going to cut that off after we get it turned. But it is way easier to turn this super, super long tube with a tube turner than having to use the elastic. Now, one thing that I love about this style is they're super fast. They take like 10 to 15 minutes to make, and there's no ironing. You're basically sewing together this really long strip, turning it right side out, putting the elastic in. That's honestly what takes the most time, is getting the elastic strung through this 80-inch piece of fabric, and then adding the hardware on the end. I'm going to share some tips and tricks I have figured out from making a few of these for turning this efficiently. And I am using a Dritz tube turner, the big one, for 1/2 inch to 1 inch fabric tubes. Now, I've done some other projects like this, and the boba tea lovers like to tell me how they use a boba straw. I don't know that a boba straw is going to be strong enough to turn this long of a tube, because you do put a bit of pressure on this thing. But if you try it, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, you might have to pony up under $10 and get one of these. So we're just going to put this in, and then we just need to push it to the very bottom, which, yay, makes more lint. I'm trying not to leave here covered with that. So now we have the tube at the very bottom where we sewed across, and we're going to use the dowel rod to turn it right side out. So you take the more pointy end, doesn't actually matter for this because we're not going to get that squared off, and you push the fabric into the tube. Now here is where it gets tricky, because we have all this fabric and this tube's only this long. So I tried it the first time where I was kind of holding it, and then you get to a point where you can't scrunch any more fabric on here. And if you get it scrunched too tight, it gets hard to move. So then you start pulling it back and the stick started coming back. So I have found that the easiest way is to keep it kind of like this. I can feel the stick. So here is the top of the tube, and here is the top of the stick. So I'm holding onto that stick as I am starting to pull that fabric off. Then I place it on the table. So I'm standing the tube up on the table, and then I'm pushing down until we have lots of fabric again. Then I'm grabbing that stick again, and I'm pulling that fabric off. So you're just going to repeat that. This is way faster than trying to deal with the stick coming out of this end. And keep pulling until this becomes flat. Because as I said, if you let this get too bunched up down here, it gets tricky. This is way easier on your hands too than doing the safety pin method of turning this right side out. And we have to use the safety pin method to get the elastic in here. So save your fingers for the first part. Now we can see that it's coming out. So we're just going to hold both of these. See, I got it a little too bunched and it's too tight and it won't flip. So then you just pull it back this way so that you can get it to keep going. And you're just going to be pushing and pulling to get this all right side out. Okay, so now we can just pull the plastic off. We don't need the stick because we don't have to worry about getting that nice and square, because that's not the point of this project. So now I'm just going to get this stick out. And honestly, the easiest way to do this is to just hold it over the floor and let it drop. So we're going to take the end that is sewn. I'm just going to kind of flatten it out because we want a straightish edge, and then I'm just going to clip. Doesn't matter really how much you take off. If you take 1/2 inch, inch, 1/4 inch, that's not going to matter. You're not going to notice a difference with your lanyard. Now, I love that we don't have to go to the ironing board and iron this flat like for other projects. It's one thing I love about doing scrunchy stuff. We're going to take our safety pin, put it on the end of the elastic, and you guessed it, we're going to thread this through. Now, I've also played around with worrying about where that seam is. Like, oh, I want to try and keep the seam in the center of one side of the elastic. It doesn't matter. You are not going to know because it's going to be so scrunchied. So we're just going to be threading this through. You don't have to worry about where you're at for a while, but the goal is to get the end of the fabric to this end of the elastic. So you can't just keep going with wild abandon all the way to the end. We're going to focus when we get closer, because we need to sew this here before we finish getting this elastic all the way through. Now, if you were going to be making a lot of these, this would be a great part to do while you're sitting watching TV. Or, I don't know, you could hire your kids to do it if they're looking to earn money. Speaking of kids, if you have kids that want to learn to sew, this could be a great project for them to do if they're making something for teachers, like for Teacher Appreciation Week or the holidays, or end of year. It's all straight sewing. It's pretty quick and it's a bunch of threading, and it's something that they could be pretty proud. And teachers always need lanyards for their ID badges. They could also make it for family members that have ID badges for work. I mean, lots of people are using lanyards for keys, for ID badges, for whatever. So you'll see we're getting close to the end. We've got this pretty tight. So I just kind of keep pushing this fabric down, but you have to be careful because if you lose this too far into the fabric, you're going to have to start over. If you only lose it about an inch, you can use tweezers to grab it. Oop. Oh no, look, I just said don't do it too far. So mine slipped in really quickly. It's there. This is here. Let's see if we can scooch it. Oh no. I've got some long tweezers. These are reverse tweezers. I love them. So when you're not squeezing it, they're closed. And when you squeeze it, they're open. So I'm going to put them in here. Yep, I can get to that elastic. I'm squeezing to open it, grab the elastic, pull that out. It's always so much fun when things happen that I tell you to be careful not to happen because it's a pain. All right, so there's my elastic. There's the end. I'm going to put a clip on that because I do not want to have to do that again. I'm just going to jump to the sewing machine really quick and just go back and forth really close to the edge, like forward, back, forward, back. And I sewed about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. We don't want it too far because the Key Fob hardware will only cover 1 inch of your end fabric. It's just to hold the elastic in place while we finish threading it through the rest of the tube. So that's attached. So now we're going to just finish and just keep moving the scrunchy part down, the fabric down, just like when we turned it right side out. If it gets too tight in one spot, it won't move. But keep it flat 1 inch to 2 inches at the bottom. We don't want it super scrunched when we go to put on our Key Fob hardware. So while I am doing this, let me know in the comments who you might make this for. There we go, we have it out the other end. And now what we're going to do is we're going to line this end up with this end. Now it's really important to make sure you don't twist this. You don't want your lanyard to be like twisted around a couple times. So you want to stretch it out and bring these ends together and then do this to make sure it is straight and there's no twist in it. Now we're going to go back and we're going to sew this a little more securely, about 1/4 to maybe 1/2 inch from the end, so that it flattens it a little bit and it gets that nice end secure. So I just went back and forth, nothing organized or neat about it, no squares, nothing like that. But I also didn't stay in the same line. This is very purposefully across the elastic a little bit because that's going to be a stronger hold for your elastic. Now I'm going to grab my little trash bin and I need to trim this end flat. We don't want a bunch of stuff sticking out because there's not a ton of space where this is going to hold, and we want it to be nice and flat against that end. So now we have a nice flat edge. Now it is time to grab our pliers and our hardware. This is again 1 inch Key Fob hardware, and that you can put your fabric in it first, then put on the pliers. I find it easiest to put this in the pliers and line up the edges. So the edge of the Key Fob hardware is at the edge of there. See, like that. And you'll notice there's a little spike in there. That is going to push into the fabric and elastic to help hold it. Now, some people also have mentioned that they add a little bit of glue, like that E6000 glue in here, just to make sure everything stays secure. I think it's going to be okay, but if you feel better putting glue in there, by all means, go for it. So I'm holding it really gently because I don't want to be squeezing it until I get the fabric in. Then I put the fabric in and I check it from the edges. I want to make sure it's not hanging out. We want it nice and centered. And then I squeeze really hard. You want that nice and tight. Now, because this is pretty thick, I like to go back on the sides and give it a little extra squeeze to just get that clamped down as well as possible. Okay, so now we have that on, but you can see that it's like super scrunchy here and barely anything here. So you're just gonna go through and just kind of organize the fabric so it's more evenly spread around the elastic, which is kind of fun because, you know, the elastic's stretching as you're doing that. This is another good watching TV project, maybe. Sitting in the car waiting to pick up the kids or the grandkids from some activity or other. Now, if you're going to be using it for keys, you could just put your keys right on here. and you could skip the lobster clasp. This is more for like ID badges and things like that. So I'm just going to string that on here like it's a key. And there you go. Because the cost of materials and the time that it takes to make and their popularity right now, quite honestly, these are definitely something to consider if you are looking for ideas to sew and sell. That said, just remember that some things sell better in certain places than others. If you're selling online, if you're selling in person, and also taking into account the trends and the styles of the area as far as your fabric choices and things like that. If you are a fan of pre-cut fabrics and these 2.5-inch pre-cuts and you have some extras lying around, you're like, what on earth am I going to do with them? This is the perfect project for that. Now I have some other projects that use these 2.5-inch pre-cuts. I will put links below the video if you want to look for more ways to use your extras. All right, so what do you think? Is this a style that you think you're going to make? Who are you going to make it for? Yourself, your family, gifts, selling? Let me know in the comments. And I would love to know your thoughts about how you would put it together. As I said, this is one. I used 2.5-inch pre-cuts. I just kept them straight. So we have the one color on the one side, one on the other side. This one, I cut both of them in half, so it gives a little bit more variety of red, black, red, black. And then the one I have on my neck, I didn't cut this one. I cut this one in half. So the teal's in the front and this green is going all the way around the back. Lots and lots of ways to go. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Click that bell so YouTube notifies you when I'm doing something new, and happy sewing. Stock up on your 3/4-inch elastic. Grab your extra 2.5-inch pre-cut strips, or you can of course cut your own 2.5-inch wide strips. I'm also going to grab my toolbox that is full of Key Fob hardware and my brand new Key Fob pliers. In this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is to make scrunchy elastic key fob wristlets. Now I have become obsessed with scrunchy stuff. If you want to learn how to do scrunchy dog bandanas, check the link in the video description. But in this video, we are going to do scrunchy wristlets. I'm going to show you how to make them out of your 2.5-inch fabric scraps. I'm going to show you how to make them as loose or full as you want them to be, and how quick and easy these are to make. If you can believe it, these are even faster than the other way. So let's get into it. Now, I have to tell you, I am almost too excited about these scrunchy key fobs because I thought the regular key fobs were pretty quick and easy to make. These things, it should almost be illegal. The first thing I'm going to show you is your choices for how scrunchy you want them to be. So all three of these were made by taking 2.5-inch pre-cuts. They come all rolled up in a ball. It's a great way to get lots of fabric. Lots of quilters use them. And then you end up with like a whole bunch left. So I like to look for projects for how to use these. Scrunchy key fobs, perfect solution. This one was made with a half. Took the 2.5-inch strip, I sewed it together, and then I cut it in half, and I put half of it on top of the elastic, spread it out, added the key fob. So that is how scrunchy or full, or, you know, I don't know what word you want to use, how gathered the fabric looks when you use half. So from one strip, I can make two that look like this. Then this one was the first one I did. And so I sewed the entire length, I put it on, and then I just kept pulling until it was kind of the scrunchie that I liked. And then I cut off the end. So for this one, I used 28 inches versus 21 inches on this one. So you can kind of see a difference. It's a little bit fuller, but for the difference, you might want to go with this so that you can make two out of every strip of fabric. Then I thought, well, what is it going to look like if we use the entire strip? So this is what it's going to look like. It's super gathered, and it's just one strip, put it all the way on, and there you go. So there's a definite difference in the look and the gathering doing the entire strip versus half or almost half. Now, another thing to remember when you're choosing your fabrics, don't worry about the direction of the fabric, because I did it first. This yellow one was made with chickens, kind of like this fabric. The print is going from the side, and I thought, well, when I sew it in half and put it on there, how's that going to look? It really doesn't matter because you can't really tell what is on this fabric. It is more the color combinations that you're seeing than the actual design. So That's kind of what you want to look for when you're using your scraps. Now this one, because these quilt blocks are a little bit smaller, you get a better idea of what they are versus the chickens. So just pick something where you like the color combination and you want to make a key fob out of it. So what other supplies do we need? We obviously need our 2.5-inch strips of fabric. These are pre-cuts. Now, if you're not a quilter or you never buy these, that's totally fine. You can cut your own pieces of fabric that are 2.5 inches wide by either 21 inches if you want it to look like this. This one is 2.5 inches wide by the full width of your fabric. So you're not left out if you're not a quilter or you don't have these pre-cuts, but people that have them, they always have extra. So I want to help them figure out how to use them. Then you're going to need the Key Fob Hardware. This is 1-inch Key Fob Hardware. Find the link in the video description to my Amazon storefront. I made a list that is everything you need to make these key fob wristlets. I highly, highly recommend you invest in the pliers. You can use regular pliers, but they're usually not quite as wide. They don't have this silicone protective. You could dent the metal. This is perfectly sized and designed to work with these key fobs. If you're just starting, you can buy a set that has like 50 of these and the pliers included. So definitely worth the investment. Then I'm going to be using my tube turner. You can use whatever combination you want. I've recently had a couple people tell me that they use boba tea straws and a chopstick. So there's lots of different things that you can find that is basically going to be an open tube and then a chopstick. I'll show you how this works. This is from a set of 3 or 4. I can't remember. I believe it was under $10. I use them all the time and they're going to last forever. So great tool investment. And I don't drink boba tea, so I don't have the boba tea straw. And then 3/4 inch wide elastic. So all you need to do is go through your bin and decide what color you want. I'm going to do this color. No matter how full or loose you want them to be, I'll show you how that works and you are going to be good to go. If you sew and sell, I think this would be a great way to go. You can offer the regular scrunchies where you can see more of the design and then maybe offer some of these too. I would sell them at the same price. It's just a different look. But these are going to sew up a lot faster, so you're going to have a better profit margin on these. Now let's head to the sewing machine. So I'm taking my 2.5-inch wide strip of fabric. I'm going to fold it in half long ways, right sides together. I don't pin this together. I just fold it as I sew. I also don't worry about cutting off the selvage. I do that at the end. This way I can just grab these strips and just rock and roll, sew a bunch of them together, and then cut them to size and put the Key Fob Hardware on them. So I'm going to sew all the way down this strip, making sure I keep these edges matched, and then I'm going to go straight across at the bottom. Now when I get to the end, I'm going to sew into the selvage band, this white section, because we are going to be cutting this off after we turn it right side out. We will need both ends open when we add the elastic and sew this together, but for turning purposes, we need to sew one end closed. So if you were sewing to sell, you could just sit and sew a bunch of these, and then you could take them and turn them right side out while you're watching TV or waiting for your kids for a doctor's appointment or at a sporting event, anywhere where you can just work with your hand. Now it is time to turn these right side out. I cut them apart. So I'm going to take my tube turner or whatever you're going to be using, find the end that is open, and I'm going to just put that in there and slide it till it gets to the sewn end. Then you're going to take the pointy end of your stick if you're using one of these tools, and you're going to push that in, and you're just going to pull the fabric down. Now, because it is really long, sometimes it gets a little tricky. As you're pulling this fabric down, the stick starts to come out, so just try and keep that up in there. We basically need the stick to absolutely stay in there. So we can see that the stick is there. You can just pull it really quickly because it doesn't matter where that is as long as our stick is up here. And this is more important that the stick be up here when you're doing something where you're going to keep that sewn edge. But because we don't want to lose too much of the length, we do want to just use that point to push that out a little bit. Now I'm just going to push the stick back out. Well, to be honest, I usually just stand up, hold it above my head, and that falls right down on the ground, but I can't do that over my workspace. Then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim the end. We don't need that anymore. That was just used to get it turned right side out. So now I'm just going to really quickly do the second one. Now I have some very exciting news. I hope you find this as exciting as I found it. The first two that I did, I was just so used to having to press these things open, right? If you're doing bag straps or anything, honestly, you're like, okay, now I need to press it open. And so I went and used my iron. And then when I was doing the third one, I thought, why am I doing that? Do I actually need to press it? Because I'm going to make it all scrunchy. So I thought, nope, I'm not going to press this one, and I'm just going to try putting it on the elastic without pressing. And guess what? It looked exactly the same. So no ironing for this project. That saves a ton of time. My favorite size key fob uses an 11-inch or a piece of elastic. So I'm just going to cut 2 pieces that are 11 inches. So we are ready to go. And we're going to do these 2 ways. So this one, I'm going to make 2 that are less scrunchy. So I'm going to trim the sewn end off, just like I did with the last one. And then I'm going to trim that selvage part off. You don't have to be super, super straight, be pretty straight, but this part is going to be inside the Key Fob hardware. So if I want to do half, I'm just going to match these ends, pull that in half, and cut. Now I'm taking a big safety pin. You can use any size. This is a quilting size safety pin, and I like them because you can just move it a little bit faster. We're not ironing, but when you put it in, what I like to do is make the seam that we sewed centered on the elastic. I don't want it spinning all around. I don't want it too close to the edge. I want it centered so that we can then have it on the inside of the wristlet. And you can always twist it as you go if it doesn't stay super well. Don't stress about it. Don't spend a ton of time on it. But that's the goal. See, it got a little crooked, so I can just do that and get that seam lined back up. Now we're going to put this through until the end of our fabric is lined up with the end of the elastic. And now we're going to go back to the sewing machine. So with our elastic evened up with the edge of the fabric, we are going to sew forward, back, and forward about 1/8 of an inch from the edge just to secure the elastic with the fabric. And that will all be under the Key Fob hardware. And now I'm going to go back to my overhead shot and show you. So that is now secure. So we're going to keep pushing the fabric until we get the other end of the elastic lined up with the other end of the fabric. Now you want to keep this scrunchy part towards the center. Don't push it all the way down here. We need this to be nice and flat until we get the hardware on. Then we're going to spread it out. Don't spread it out before you put the hardware on. You want it kind of all scrunched in the center of your elastic. Okay, take that safety pin off. Now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and attach that in the same way. So now we have it sewn on both ends. I am going to trim these ends to make sure they're straight. Make sure there's not a bunch of threads. We want to get all of these threads off of here. We're going to match these edges. I'm going to go back to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew those together one more time just to make sure one part isn't going to slip out and that this is going to be a set. Okay, now I feel good about that. It's going to stay together. It's not going to move or get unaligned when I am putting it in the hardware. Now, there's some different ways to do this. You can put it on the fabric, then get your hardware on there and squeeze. Some people take this keychain off because they find then it doesn't get in the way. I don't like doing that because I often break my nails when I do that, and it's just an extra step. So I like to put the key fob in my pliers and I line it up with the top edge. And I make sure the points are on the bottom. And you can see this is out of the way. It's not going to bother me. Then I'm going to put the fabric inside and I'm going to double check each side to make sure the fabric isn't poking over one side or the other of the hardware. And then I'm going to squeeze. Now you'll see it still feels like there is a bit of a gap, and I have that problem mostly with the elastic version, not as much with the fusible fleece version because that's more pliable. So then what I do is I come back and I squeeze each side again. So you can see that is a little bit tighter on this side than on this side. The last thing you need to do is just push the fabric so that it's evenly scrunched, gathered. I don't know, what word would you use for this? So it's spread out evenly and looks super cute. That was so fast. So let's do this one and we'll do the entire one. So we'll do the half fabric and we'll do the full fabric to really see the difference between the two. One thing that I love about key fobs is I just don't think you can have too many, right? They're kind of an accessory. So this makes a great stocking stuffer, a great gift for teachers, for service providers, like if you get your nails done or your hair done and you just want to make them something a little bit special. People can have multiple keychains. They could have a summer one, a holiday one, fall, winter. I mean, you could just keep moving your keys based on the season, or even if they have enough, they could change their key fob based on the color that they're wearing. Totally up to them. So let me know in the comments while I do this scrunching who you might make these for. Now, if you wanted to add a tag to your scrunchies, maybe just, for branding, if you're sewing and selling, or just so people know that you made it, this is a 1-inch tag that I had made years ago, woven, and I'm just going to put it on the inside and then fold that over. And I'm going to make sure that we're going to catch that when we sew that closed. So there's lots of cute tags that you can purchase online. You can make your own. I'm going to do another video about how to make your own tags. But see, now that's going to be on the inside. Next step, grab my pliers, put my hardware in there, put my fabric in, make sure it is lined up, and squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Then I'm going to do my extra squeeze on each side. So it's almost done, but you can see now it looks like a heart. It's kind of weird because we need to get this fabric evened out. Half a piece, a full piece. And then I want to show you again the fabric that these started with. So this one is from my spring barn fabric, and you can see little pieces of it, but you can't really tell what it is. It's more just kind of colors along there. And then this one was made from this fabric. You can actually tell that those are the little circle windmills better because it isn't gathered as much and because it is a simpler pattern. But either way, they look great, and it is a great way to use your fabric scraps. So let me know which way you like better, who you're going to be making these for, and happy sewing. I'm ready to stop reading, but I need a bookmark. Should I grab a receipt, part of the box from Gum, or should I grab this super cute fabric corner bookmark? Obviously, I'm going to go for this. Studies show that people with cute bookmarks read more, retain more, and enjoy their books even more than those who use receipts or trash, basically. Okay, maybe studies don't say that, but I say that. I mean, look at how cute that looks. So I'm going to show you 3 different sizes that you can make, and you can decide which one you like the best. These make a great addition to a gift of a book. It's a super quick and easy thing to sew and sell, and it is just fun to have for yourself. So I'm going to show you 3 different sizes, 3.5-inch square, 3-inch square, and a 2.5-inch square. They are each cut from a square of fabric that is a 1/2 inch larger, so 4-inch, 3.5-inch, and 3-inch. It requires 3 pieces of fabric. 1 piece for the back, 1 piece for this full square where the book's pages are going to go over top, and then 1 that we're going to be folding into a triangle for that top corner. Then you're also going to use a piece of interfacing. I am using this interfacing, fusible interfacing from Heat and Bond, and it's kind of like a paper feel to it. It's just going to give the bookmark a little bit more shape and stability. And this gets cut a 1/2 inch smaller than whichever size square you are starting with. You're going to be turning over the back one, and you will fuse this right into the center. That way you're not going to have this extra paper inside your seam allowance. Your seam allowance will pretty much just go right around that. So those are the pieces that you need. Now these flowers do have a direction. The top is all up here, but they're not super directional and they're not large icons like some of these are. So you can just cut that however you want. And if you fold it into a triangle and make sure you put it on here where the flowers are facing up, it's going to be beautiful. You just don't want to do it where the flowers look like they're falling down into your book. However, if you like using fabrics with more icons and you want to be more specific, I'm going to teach you how to fussy cut into any of these sizes, or how to fussy cut so that you have exactly what you want on the back of your bookmark. So let's get started. Now these sizes sound well and good, but what do they look like in a book? Let me show you. Back to our Secret Lives of Colors. This is the larger one, which is 3.5 by 3.5, which is pretty big, in my opinion. Then this one is the 3 by 3. And then this one is the 2.5 by 2.5. So you can see they're all going to hold the pages. They're just going to hold a little bit differently. And then if we take them out, I just want to show you, it doesn't really add a lot of bulk. You put a few pages around it, and it's not going to harm your book. Now, this is kind of a medium-sized hardback book, but what if you are just, reading an airport book? So let's grab John Grisham and see what they look like in here. So this is just a more traditional size novel, and that's getting a bit big, in my opinion. The medium one, I'm like Goldilocks in the Bookmark. That's that size. And the smaller one. So I think this is my favorite. It works well, and the fact that I have the ruler that is the perfect size to make it makes everything that much easier for me. So I think this is my go-to size, but you can decide which size you like the best. Let me know in the comments what you think you would lean into. Would you be doing the 3.5 inch finished, the 3 inch, or the 2.5 inch finished? Let me know. So we are going to make another corner bookmark just like this. This is the 3 inch size, and we're going to put this little covered bridge here, and we're going to fussy cut so it is centered on the back. So I have a piece of fabric, and fussy cut basically means just to be very deliberate about what part of the fabric you're using. So if you happen to be lucky and you have a ruler, so this square ruler is the exact size that I need. It's 3.5 inch square, and it has this line here so that I can see what is going to be in that top triangle when I fold it in half to make that shape. Now, if I was making a lot of them at once, I would take a piece of painter's tape, or this is washi tape, which is just a very low tack tape, and I would put it on my ruler just past that line. I want to be able to see the line, because then my eye very easily looks in this top corner. It's not going to mess around down here. So just visually makes it a little faster. Then I can just move my ruler around and decide where I want it. So do I want more of this tree, but then I cut off a bit of the bridge? Do I want it here? Anything under the blue won't show, because that is going to be in your seam allowance. Anything inside the blue and to this side of this tape, so in this triangle, is going to show on your corner bookmark. So we could do that. We could do this brown one. We could do this white one. So you can just pick different scenes. We could do trees. The main thing is you have to make sure that the ruler is totally on the fabric. So if we tried to do it down here, it wouldn't work because our fabric ends here, but we need the fabric to go all the way to here. So that's one way, if you have the perfect size ruler. If you don't, you can use a bigger ruler and tape off the whole square, but I want to show you what I have created. I'm pretty excited about it. I do talk about fussy cutting a bit because I design a bit of fabric where I like to fussy cut. So I have a tutorial for making these 3 size bookmarks in my Etsy shop. So it's got lots of photos. We'll walk you through all of these steps, and it's also going to have these templates. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut these out. The gray is the 1/4 inch seam. So it's basically what this blue does on the ruler. And then you're going to cut out the dark part so that we have like a little window that we can use to figure out what's what. So I just take these sharp scissors. I love these Fiskars, easy action. They're really easy on your thumb. That nice point makes it easy to get into the corner and just trim out the dark section. I also added the size, like the size fabric, and then the size bookmark that you will make on each of these templates so that you don't have to scratch your head if you use them and then you come back another time and want to make more. Just make sure you're not using fabric scissors for this, obviously. Paper scissors, everyone, paper scissors. So that's how you make your template. So this one is the same size as the ruler. We can use this to do the same thing, right? So you're not going to see what's down here, but it's really easy. You don't have to tape or anything. You're just kind of moving the window and seeing exactly what's what and what's going to be where. So let's get a cutting mat. And I'm going to use this rotating one because then we can leave the fabric alone and move the mat and not have to move this quite as much. So this is what we're looking for. We want to have this bridge and a bit of the road in there. Then I'm going to take this, I'm just going to butt it up against there and cut. Now, if I was using the ruler, I could just cut around it, but then you end up with some weird lines sometimes. So what you could also do is take two rulers, take one that is basically as long or longer than your fabric, butt it up next to it, move that one, and then cut. That makes sure that your scrap that is left has a nice straight cut on it. And then it also has one edge lined up so we can do the rest just moving around. Now, depending on how much you use rotary cutters, you might want to just turn and be going straight on every cut, because sometimes if you do it this way, you might angle a little bit. It takes a little bit of practice. I've even seen people that can do 1, 2, 3. I cannot go this way, and I can't really go this way very easily. It's faster for me to turn it. So rotary cutting around something is a skill that takes practice, like most things. So now we have this ready and we have our perfect corner. So now let's get this part, and I'm going to fussy cut this too. You don't have to. This is where your book pages are going to go. But if you have it on the table while you're reading, it looks cute to have the cute little covered bridge there opposite that one. And then we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to move it around, but this time we're looking at the bottom left triangle instead of the upper right. So you can do it with the ruler, or you can use the piece of paper. So just turn it and then you can just see what is going to be where. So now we have the corner and the bottom. And now we need to fussy cut the back. And this is just going to be the full square. So if we were using this, you can't really see through part of it. I guess you could print it again and cut that corner out, so then you have the full square if you think you're going to be doing a lot of fussy cutting like this. But I usually just do this and then I like peek and make sure that all looks good. Now, if you were sewing and selling these, this obviously takes a bit longer than if you used a fabric more like the flowers, where you can just cut, and cut without having to pay attention to what is going on. You might sell it a little faster if somebody really likes what you've put up here. I'm not sure how much more money you would get for it versus something that is random. I'm not sure how much more value someone's going to see with this than with this, but I don't know, you could give it a try. And then I have a 3-inch square of the interfacing. So we have our back, our inside, our triangle, and our interfacing. And now let's go to the ironing board. So here are 3 pieces. This is the back. So I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to put my interfacing, making sure the shiny side is down because we want it to adhere to the fabric and not to our iron. Going to follow manufacturer's instructions and just adhere that. Now we're going to take this one and we are going to just fold it corner to corner to make a triangle and press. This is going to be our front. This is our back. And I'm going to grab 3 clips. And the way I clip is very important too, because it helps me when I'm sewing, especially if I'm making a lot of these. You don't want to have to be checking and making sure you like where you're starting and stopping. So I have a system for how I do this. Ask my husband, I have systems for almost everything. So I'm going to put the front base fabric down. Then I'm going to put the triangle. I always like my triangle in the upper right. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to flip it so they are right sides together. Because these are directional, I want to make sure they're the same direction. I don't want this to be sideways or upside down. If you're using non-directional, doesn't matter at all. So I have all these edges lined up, and now I'm going to do 3 clips. The top of the triangle and the 2 sides. So I like to leave my opening at the bottom of my bookmark. I would either do it here or here. You definitely want it to be on this individual place and not on the triangle. So by putting my clips there, I know that I'm going to start here, go all the way around and stop here, leaving as much of this as possible open for turning. The smaller ones, the harder it is to turn. So now we just need to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to just use gray thread. I could use white with this one, but I made a bunch earlier and I found just using gray, kind of neutral, I didn't have to change my thread as much. So we're going to sew around. And you'll notice I'm pretty much at the edge of that interfacing when I need to turn. And if I'm slow enough to stop a little bit short, I'll lift my foot, turn it 45 degrees and take 1 stitch, and then lift and turn. That is a way to make it so that your corners are going to be a little bit sharper. So it's a good habit to get into. You really do need to leave quite a bit of space on these 2 smaller sizes so that you can turn it right side out. Now, before we do the turning and the pressing, we need to clip these corners. And I like to clip from both sides. Make sure you don't clip where you have the opening because you're going to need that fabric to fold under so that we can get this closed nice and secure. Now I'm going to turn this right side out. Now I want to show you one thing that sometimes makes me panic when I'm turning things right side out. You remember this is going to be on the front, but sometimes when you turn it right side out, your triangle ends up at, in front of the back. So if it's on the upper left and it's not fussy cut like you wanted, don't panic, just flip it. It's just flipped in the wrong direction. Then I'm going to take a turning tool and I'm going to gently push at these corners. If you push too hard, you're going to end up with threads coming through because you're going to push through that fabric a little bit. So sometimes I like to squeeze it along the seams too. Helps get a little bit of a better corner. Then our opening, we just need to get those threads inside. And I'm going to line that up with my fingers first. And then we're going to press. I want it nice and flat, so I press it pretty well. And then I'm going to use my tailor's clapper. The quilter's clapper is their shorter one. Riley Blake calls the longer one the tailor's clapper. It's basically the same type of piece of wood, just a different length. But what it does is it helps to really flatten those seams, and it also takes some of the heat out so that it's not as hot to the touch. So now it is pressed, and all we need to do is sew all the way around the edge, and it's done. So if you want to sew and sell, or you like giving books like to grandchildren or friends, your book club, this is a great and easy little gift to whip up. Now that we have this pressed and we have it sewn and flipped, this is getting a little bit thick. So I'm going to use these little folded pieces of fabric. It was basically, I think, a 4 or 5 inch square. I folded it in half, zigzagged the edge to make these little pockets. I use it to hang quilts up. But I also use it to help even things up. If I didn't use it, we'd have that much space between this and my needle plate. But if I bump that up against it, it's now even. So it gives your presser foot and your feed dogs something to work with to get going. So it's a little bit easier on your machine, and it's going to make it so it doesn't kind of stall out on you. So now I'm just going to sew close to the edge all the way around. I like to start on this corner, this opposite corner, and sew all the way around. I don't want to be starting or stopping on the pretty corner of the bookmark, and it's a little more awkward to start over here. I'm also going to pull up my bobbin thread. So I put my presser foot down, put my needle down, needle up. By pulling up the bobbin thread, you're going to make sure you don't have a weird knot from your machine mistakenly and rudely pulling your thread underneath. So you're going to grab both. You're going to hold them back while you get started. So just take a few stitches forward, and then back to secure the thread, and then you're just going to keep going. Now, as I sew, each time I turn, I'm going to put this back behind here just to keep things a bit evened up. Now with another one, I did try just sewing this part and leaving this top corner unsewn. It gives a little bit of a different look, but I didn't like it as much because it made this whole thing like a little bit puffier in the book. So I'm a fan of doing the entire circle, but take a look and let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments if you like it better when you just sew the bottom closed and up this side and leave the corner that goes over the pages unsewn, or if you like it just sewn all the way around. Then you're just going to trim the thread and it's ready for a book. All right, so what do you think? Are you going to take a stab at some corner bookmarks? Let me know in the comments which size you like. And I am going to get back to The Secret Lives of Color. It is a lot more interesting than you might think. So I'm going to drop a link to this book. If you like to learn about color and some fascinating little stories, you might love this book, or it might be one that you want to gift to someone in your life. Happy sewing and happy reading. So what do you think? Leave me a comment. Let me know which ones you're going to try, who you're going to make them for, and wishing you happy sewing and a very Merry Christmas.